wanted to thank everybody for joining us today, and we've got task force members here. We've got task force members that have logged on remotely. So we want to jump right in and get going with our Missouri Supply Chain Task Force meeting. We've got a great agenda, and we're going to, out of great deference for opening day, just around the corner from here, in case anybody's trying to get to the game, we're going to whip right through this and make sure that that folks can get over to the ballpark and welcome that major league season that we were hoping would happen, and was at a little bit of risk. So that would have hurt the fun of coming out of a pandemic. What fun is that if we can't go to a ball game? So my name is Patrick McKenna, and I have the honor of co-chairing the task force. And with us today, because we're in a MoDOT facility and it's good practice anyway, we have Eric Ramsey is going to join us for a safety briefing for this facility. So Eric, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Kansas City. Hello, my name is Eric Ramsey. I'm the Kansas City MoDOT District Safety and Health Manager. Talk about a few safety issues here as far as someone who could be an emergency response flagger, someone who could flag down the fire, EMS, police if we need to have an emergency responder. So is there someone who would be willing to be a flagger for the emergency responders? Raise your hand. What is your name, sir? It's Derek. Derek. Thank you, Derek. Appreciate that. They can be identified by lights and sirens, so it'll be easy. So in the event of a fire, which I certainly hope we don't have, please exit the room, follow the exit signs, do so in an orderly and organized manner. Remember, if you encounter smoke, to either go the other way or crawl low under smoke. Find the exits, and there are exits at both ends of the building and in the center of the building. Is there anyone who is willing to call 911 without delay in the event of a fire?
I'll go ahead and do that.
Thank you. And remember, if we do have to exit the building in case of a fire or other emergency, it's a very good idea to help those who we may encounter who are having difficulty exiting the building and help those who have need. In the case of a small fire, we have fire extinguishers right out here in the hallway in a cabinet. So is there anyone who would be willing to use a fire extinguisher, remembering the pull, aim, squeeze, sweep method of using a fire extinguisher? Ma'am, your name? Thank you, Amanda. In the event of severe weather, and I believe the forecast is that we should not be encountering severe weather, nothing in the form of hail or lightning or tornadoes. However, I think we are in a situation where there could be high winds, which can present some hazards. So please be careful when you're outside, caution to the high winds. And I think we're also in a high fire danger. So we want to make sure that no smoking materials or anything else that could have an ignition component is discarded carelessly. In the event of a medical emergency, I'm getting old and it could happen. So if that happens, I would hope that someone would maybe call 911 on my behalf. Do we still have the 911 caller of Director McKenna? Okay, thank you for doing that. And is there anyone who would be willing to volunteer to start CPR on me? And your name, sir? Brandon, thank you. Myself and any others would be very grateful. And then we would need to see if someone who would step right out the door here and in the hallway is an AED. So do we have someone who would be willing to go get the AED and bring it in? Thank you. And your name? Thank you. In the event of an earthquake, drop, cover, and hold on. And the last thing I would share to bring to your attention is if in the event we did have the unfortunate encounter of an intruder, someone who would be an active shooter, remember your options are to run, hide, or fight. This concludes the safety minute. Are there any questions? No. Thank you.
Well done. Thank you, Eric. Appreciate that. So we've got some great presentations today. Before we get into those, I'd like to open it up to task force members for any opening comments. Start with Dr. Leathers, any opening comments to get us going today?
Oh, thank you, Director McKenna. I look forward to hearing from everybody today. As I said before, these events, each region we learn quite a bit about what's happening, and it's a good reminder to us of how diverse and unique Missouri is. And so, one thing I just wanted to plug, we are continuing to look for feedback outside of these meetings. We have the Best of Midwest website. The word best, www.bestinmidwest.com. There's an opportunity to provide feedback. We're going to do a better job. I'll own the fact that we probably haven't promoted that and prioritized that as much as we should have to this point. So we're going to try to get that out there, but we want everyone to have a chance to give feedback, even outside of the terrific presentations that we're receiving. So just thank you. And I look forward to seeing you guys finally in person in St. Joe and Hannibal. I will be at those, and we're going to bring some speakers in. So today I'm heading to the Boot Hill after this. So I'll be on the opposite side of the state of you guys. And I don't get to enjoy opening day except by radio.
Great. Thanks, Todd. And yeah, and we have the website as well that's set up for feedback, and we're in the point of preliminary drafting of the report where we're incorporating the presentations and all the information that we've received. We're going to have a public comment period for that as well. So we're hoping to receive feedback from the public, from interested parties and otherwise. Any other opening comments, Chris?
Director, I'll just add, in addition to Eric's comment, welcome to the Kansas City region. We appreciate you being here. I figured since I haven't been in person yet, I needed to be in my home city's event, and I'm glad to be here today, so thanks.
Terrific. Caitlin, Todd, Mary? Okay. I could read the lips. Caitlin's looking forward to the presentation, so.
Yes, yeah. Good job.
All right.
Director McKenna, Mary Lamey's on the line.
Hi, Mary.
I'm having issues with my camera, and I can't explain why. So I'm on the.
Okay, well, great. Thank you for joining us. So first up, we have an overview of really some of what we want to talk about today is the technology that is part of the supply chain, some of the emerging technologies with electric vehicles and automated and connected vehicles. And we have Liz Prestwood is going to give us a presentation on that from MoDOT. So Liz, thank you for being with us today.
Good afternoon. Can you guys hear me okay online? I know there was some chatter that there was some problems with audio. Well, again, I am Liz Preston.
It's a little light from the podium. If maybe closer to the microphone, or.
I'll just have to lean in, I guess. Is that better?
Yes, that's better.
That's better.
Yep. He's our Director of Transportation and problem solver of audio issues. Thank you. So again, I am the Policy and Innovation Program Manager at MoDOT, and I'm going to cover a couple of the ITS, AV, and EV. Some of these concepts are being implemented and used in Missouri, but a lot of them are not. Some of those are for regulatory issues or legislative that needs to be addressed, but it's good to at least just start the conversation and see what is available. For the, oops. Sorry, I'll just keep going then. So we have a bunch of different terms that we use, and we love our alphabet soup in transportation. So I'm just going to go ahead and set the stage so we all know what these terms mean. ITS is the Intelligent Transportation System, and if you have a minute, just down the hall we have our Scout office, and they're kind of the hub, if you will, the mission control of ITS for the Kansas City area. They have a big glass window, they're a fishbowl. It's kind of fun to look at and just see what's going on. But what they do is the ITS, there's a range of different implementable systems. So they're everything from the dynamic message boards that you see out there that are communicating to the drivers of what's going on the highway. Sometimes they're just safety messages, or they can communicate hazards ahead or severe weather that they should know about. We also have deployed in some of our areas what's called predictive analytics, and that's a modeling tool that's constantly collecting data and analyzing it so that we can further enhance our safety response to incidents or weather. So it'll take into account time of day, angle of the sun, how much traffic is out there, how long has it been since it's rained last, is it going to be an oil slicky kind of road. So we can put all of that into a system, and this is just by segments on different roadways, but we're testing it out to see how we can improve. And that's another intelligent transportation system. Moving on, we have the electric vehicles, and this is getting a lot of publicity right now, and I'll go into that a little bit more. But this can be for the passenger or freight. A lot of people are excited about this for the reduced emissions, reduced operating costs. But again, I'll go into that a little bit further in my presentation. Sorry, I'm talking fast. You have me excited about opening day. I want everyone out of here. Last is the automated vehicles. And this is one that I think people get a little confused. Is it, driverless cars? Are we, going all the way to, I don't know, use a movie, Back to the Future. But a lot of the automation you already have on your car today. And so there's different levels. There's everything from a 0 to a 5. 0 is no automation at all. You need to be there driving it all the time. It's your standard vehicle. Things like level 1 would be a shared control. You could have your cruise control. They have adaptive cruise control. There's lane departure that'll kind of buzz you when you're moving out. And then level 3, they have hands off, eyes off, mind off, and then no steering wheel at all. It is important to note that as of last year, there are no vehicles out there with a 3, 4, or 5. Every vehicle on the road right now that is considered automated, is considered needing a driver behind the wheel at all times. And feel free to interrupt me at any time if you have any questions as we're going through this. So moving into freight. The TPAS, which is the Truck Parking Availability System. This is an app that drivers can use to identify available parking. We've talked a lot about the need for more truck parking and how it can impact our drivers because they only have a set number of hours that they can be on the road. So where can they find safe parking? The TPAS app is not in use for public spaces in Missouri right now. For our private applications, they do have some reservation system that the drivers can use, but there are other states that do have a more comprehensive system for their truck parking availability. So this is one of those opportunities that we could use to increase our knowledge of where the truck parking is. And another presenter later on today, Amanda, I think she's going to go into a little bit more of the TPAS and some of the truck parking. So moving into some more ITS available for freight. What we have up here is an example. This is something that, again, is not fully implemented in Missouri. We do have the vehicle-to-vehicle type communication, and vehicle-to-vehicle would be anything from Bluetooth to having the vehicles, communicating with one another. I think someone just turned my volume up. Back a few years ago, truck platooning was a big conversation, and it never really took off for a couple of reasons, but that's an example of vehicle-to-vehicle. One of the restrictions of this type of technology is that the legislation changes from the state to state, so it's hard for these long-haul truckers to utilize this kind of technology effectively as they cross from one border state to another. The vehicle-to-infrastructure, this could be anything from GPS, for the transponders for way in motion, transponders for the toll roads. This is your vehicle communicating with the physical infrastructure out there. And it can give data to you and you can get data back from it. The example up here of the Texas Triangle, this is one of the more robust systems out there where they have real-time alerts for the roadway conditions that they can push out to these truck drivers. They can notify them of hazards, if there's an animal in the roadway or if there's a crash or specific types of construction that might be going on. Are you going head on head? Is it going to be a shift in the traffic pattern? Right now, about that in a minute. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. Another ITS for available for freight that we do not have implemented in Missouri is the freight signal priority. And this is most useful in our arterial corridors where you might have that last mile or 5 miles of service when you're getting off of the freeway system and you're going to be encountering traffic signals. This fits into the vehicle to infrastructure where they can. Yes, sir.
We have a question from Todd.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Sorry, I can't see the.
No, and I usually don't notice, so Chris, thank you. Yep.
Okay. Yes, sir.
There's quite a bit of difference between the audio volume for, well, it's better now that I think you said you turned the volume up at the microphone, so I'll leave it at that. But I was curious, you on the Texas Triangle, you said there are warning systems. Did I miss how the alerts or the warning, in what form are those?
Great question. I assume I've never actually been in a cab, but I imagine, the newer ones have some technology that can be pushed out, so maybe it doesn't work for everyone, but the drivers who do subscribe to these types of notifications, whether it's through their smartphone or some sort of tablet they have up. Great question. I actually do not know if someone else on the panel might be able to speak to that. We can try to find out some more information. I do
Okay,
have some connections, and
but
I do have some connections at TxDOT that we can ask them. I know it's a public-private partnership, so it's not just the state. There's a lot of private involvement.
Yes,
Okay.
I understand. It's like a paid app.
Yeah.
I think that they're using. They're trying to make sure that it's affordable, and through the companies, but it is kind of pushing out. It's working through also to help the drivers route around those. So they're working with their their routing systems as well, so that they can modify their routes and keep rolling at regular speeds.
Yes, and I'm looking back at my notes. It says that there are 1,000 commercial vehicles that are subscribed to this service at this time. So I think it is a purchase for service.
Okay, so it wouldn't be in the form of road signs or anything like that, other vehicles or any vehicle that could take advantage of, correct?
I envision it sort of like the Waze app. Are you familiar with that one, sir?
Actually, I am.
Okay, so that is a group sharing where other users of the roadway will report hazards, and you can get directional information, but also find out what might be on the roadway. This system is probably more plugged into the traveler information map, plugged into other additional information that would be useful for the freight drivers.
And you know what? You mentioned paid app. What's the name of the paid app?
We'll get that information and make it available.
Okay.
I don't think any of us have it off the top of our head right now. Thanks.
Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, these are great questions. It's great technology, and a really neat example. I'll see if I can get you some more resources for that app in Texas. So going back to the arterial corridors and this vehicle to infrastructure communication to try to get the trucks to acknowledge that it is a truck that's moving through, to help prevent all of the idling time, the start and stop time. This is going to help with continuing to move this freight through their travel time, as well as some of the emissions that they would be putting into the communities. So here's another freight application, and this is again an example from Texas. Texas has a lot of this already deployed, so they're a good state to kind of look to of what they're implementing. This is another one where they're pushing this this live feed data out, and it can give the pre-construction closures and send data directly to the connected truck. So that's the vehicle to vehicle. I don't want to be redundant, but I will say that in Missouri, I was talking to one of our employees in motor carrier, Deanna Rickabaugh, and she said that I showed her this slide, and she was like, "Oh my gosh, I would love to have this for our motor carriers." And I said, "Well, what do you do right now?" And she said, "Well, right now we do a manual report that's published every Friday. She has to type up, and it's only put out to those truck drivers that subscribe to the, these notifications. But she'll put things in there of like known closures, detours, construction, and different traffic patterns, or where there might be narrow lanes. But it's only a weekly, and it has to be manually inputted. So she was really tickled that this. She's like, I need to go find out more about this. This next one, we have it under ITS, but it's also it's more of a managed lane. And a managed lane is another one that has a myriad of definitions and implementation strategies. You can have everything from a truck only to a cars only, or you can have dynamic tolling, you can have HOV lanes. So there's lots of different ways to implement this. The example up here on the bottom is this was a design that MoDOT had kicked around for a while of having separated truck lanes to actually have a physical barrier between the regular traveling public and our trucks. And this was an example on I-70. If you've traveled I-70, you know we have not done this. It is very expensive to implement and not always as useful as you might think, because of the in and out of how often these trucks need to get on and off these dedicated truck lanes. They might end up in the regular traffic if they have a stop in that city, or need to get on the rest area or something like that. But it is something in the toolbox of possibilities, as well as the truck only. Another story I heard from someone about truck only lanes is they went out to the public and they said, no, we don't want the trucks to have their truck only lane. When we flipped it and said cars only, they're like, yes, cars only. So some of it's just in the wording and the messaging of how you put it. But other possibility, car traffic from the.
Yeah, and I will say we did, comes down to it's cost prohibitive. The public expectation against the willingness to pay are two very distinct things. So
I guess I was under, maybe under emphasis of how much this costs to put on there, and how much of a footprint it really takes up. But yes, it is. I don't know of any place in the country that has actually deployed this. There's been a lot of discussion about it.
New Jersey Turnpike.
Okay, of course. So there is funding available for some of these examples of the ITS, the Intelligent Transportation Systems, through the new IJA or bill. It has two names. I've never seen that before, but I think it's interchangeable of IJA or bill. There are, I think, over 160 billion grant opportunities, and some of them are very focused on our freight movement and improvement of the physical roadway infrastructure as it relates to freight. I'm also the grants coordinator, so I could spend more time on this slide than almost any of the others. But I'll just give a quick oversight or overview, because there is a notice of funding that was published last month, and it's due in April. And I think a lot of this group is probably familiar with the term infra, and that's one of the the big grants that's related to improving our freight movement of goods. But this year, through this bill, they've done something different, and they've combined the application into one, and they're calling it Multi-Modal Project Discretionary Grants, which is a mouthful. But it's 3 grants, all under one application, and the applicant can pick between these 3, and they are the infra, mega, and the rural surface transportation. So if you have more questions about that, I have a wealth of information, because this is what I do full-time pretty much. but those opportunities are out there. The other one is RAISE, which is more for our regional and local significance, but it can relate to some of the freight movement as well. That application has been out for a little while now, and it is due next week. So if you're thinking about applying for a RAISE grant, you need to get cracking. But we do have a fair amount that are going to be applying through Missouri. All right, getting back to the EV, the electrification of heavy trucks. Now, this is something that everyone is talking about. We know that the industry is going to start moving in this direction. It's more of a concept for heavy truck at this point. There just isn't a battery big enough. We don't have charging stations that can carry the amount of power they need to charge across the country. So this is a growing area of discussion. There is the Regional Electric Vehicle Midwest, which is a partnership between Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, Minnesota, and Wisconsin. And they have this coalition is they've agreed to meet and talk about how to accelerate the medium and heavy-duty fleet electrification, to elevate the economic growth of the industry leadership, and try to advance the equity and clean environment. So, and also to identify the barriers and what they can do to help remove some of those barriers. So, again, this is just something that, we think the industry is going to be headed in this direction. We're not there yet, but there are people that are talking about it. Yes, sir.
Hey, Liz, is there any kind of data that speaks to the difference in cost of ownership from electric to what we know in fuel-operated equipment?
We have that information for passenger vehicles, but as it relates to freight, I have not seen anything. I can look into that for you, though.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. The vehicle electric opportunities. So there's another one that I spend the rest of my time on, which is called NEVI, and this one just came out of the new infrastructure bill as well. And this is to help deploy and implement electric charging stations across the United States. There's two types of funding. There's one which is the $2.5 million, focus on the state and local governments, MPOs, and that's going to be building out the alternative fuel corridors, in these communities. But these are all going to be discretionary grants, so you can apply directly for this money. The other one, the larger pot of money, which is NEVI, National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure is what the I stands for. This is formula funding that went directly out to the states. Missouri has a little less than $100 million for our electrification, and it has to be on the alternative fuels corridor, which I don't have a map of it up here, but it's basically just the interstate system for right now. There are some pretty tight parameters of what they're looking for and what can be implemented, but Missouri is, actively trying to get together our plan of what this is going to look like. A plan is required, and work out how we're going to deploy and implement these NEVI funds over the next 5 years. Some other funding opportunities. They have the STBG, Surface Transportation Block Grants. Some of that is formula. Some of it goes directly to the MPOs. We have the CMAQ, which is the Congestion Mitigation Air Quality Improvements. Those are only eligible in our two large metro areas of Kansas City and St. Louis. And then there is a smaller pot of money for reducing truck emissions at ports. So I'm not going to spend too much time here, but just want you to be aware of some of the funding opportunities that are available. All right, so the freight automation. This is something that's deployed in some locations, but to varying degrees. And again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time here because, again, another speaker, Amanda, she's going to take a deeper dive on some studies that they've done, and she'll be able to speak more in depth and more intelligently to it. So we'll hold out for Amanda for Mark to speak on this. This one I think is just kind of fun because maybe I can have my prime deliveries and my husband wouldn't know about it. Because he'll just be driving up in this little device as opposed to the big truck that comes, right? So these personal delivery devices, this is more for the last mile of service. It's really only been implemented and tested in very urban areas where you can have access to these, close together houses. So imagine a FedEx truck or a UPS truck pulls up and they know they have so many deliveries within a certain range. They can deploy these personal delivery devices and, send them out into the neighborhood, deliver them, and then they all come back. Alternately, there could be, in a more rural setting, maybe instead of going down the road for, 5 more miles, you can deploy one of these, go on to the next one, come back and pick it up. There's different strategies, but this is something that is being tested, by various companies with some levels of success. Another one is the unmanned aircraft system. So these are the drones, and these are also another opportunity to get trucks and cars off the road and use some of our aerial space to have these deliveries. There are only, again, a handful of locations that are using these, but it is another opportunity for, using the technology and the tools available. And while these things are still in their infancy, the progression curve of innovation usually, kind of starts off slow and then goes peaks and then down, and then we find the happy medium of where it works in our society. Yes, sir.
Liz, I might add, K-State has a pretty significant unmanned drone center at the University out in Manhattan.
Neat. So this last line, and there's a link here. So when the presentation is posted, I encourage you guys to go to this link. And this is a link that has the whole United States, and it'll show by state what innovations they have actually implemented. And so you can see where they are, what they are, and to some degree what success their usefulness is. So because of time, I'm not going to go in there. Otherwise, we'd all say, let's go see what's going over here. But on your own, it is a really neat website to go look at and pick and choose what's being done where. There's also going to be some updates to the what's called MUTCD, which is the Manual on Unified Traffic Control Devices. So to help with some of these new innovations so that we can communicate to the public, what are these things? How do you interact with it? Where are they? So like, coming up with signs for where the EV charging is going to be on the alternative fuels corridor. We have to come up with ways to communicate that to the public. And then finally, the new authorization bill has the Center of Excellence on New Mobility and Automated Vehicles. And this is the focus and the research of the impacts of our AV technology.
So thanks, Liz. Want to make sure if anybody has any questions. A little bit of a question, a little bit of a comment for me. When we look at the emerging technologies and everything, we've kind of gone through this in several forms and fashions at the department, always looking to improve the operation of the system itself. But in some cases, it's a little bit of a chicken and egg thing going on. There's a race to trying to find a standard application for these. So I always find it interesting trying to determine what the role of government is versus the private sector. We're kind of delving into that, I think, with the federal bill, particularly with EV charging stations. I happen to believe that it's probably not the best practice for government to be selecting where these locations are. It should be kind of a private profit motive to determine it, just like we have with the fueling stations now at the retail level. So, getting them started, which I think is the purpose of this bill, is just to bring down some of the range anxiety that exists with the consumer market right now, to know that you can travel on the interstates and not end up stranded somewhere. So I think it's a good initial step, and it's just good. I think there's going to be some experimentation that's going to be needed, and that's tough on the public sector side because the public expects a perfect return for their dollar every time. And we know that that's not possible, particularly when you're trying to deal with new technologies. So Missouri has, you know, from a DOT perspective, we try to pull in work that has been done by other states and try to pull their innovations in where we can, particularly at a price point that works. So this is going to be an interesting part of the development. I do think that on the electrification side, I think commercial vehicles are going to lead the way, really, in terms of penetration, adoption, even if it's in the smaller vehicle fleets like the Amazons and FedEx. And that's going to be an interesting construct going forward, because I think that will also help spur the development of the fueling stations and the technology associated with it to try to get the times down that it takes. So interesting time, really, that we're in. I don't know if that's, you know, it's an exciting time, though, because there are a lot of changes coming, and I think we just have to, from a standpoint of supply chain, really try to encourage private sector innovation from a state perspective and otherwise. So I think we're always looking for things that could help from a regulatory standpoint that might be suggestions from industry or anything like that we can help out with. So any questions for Liz?
Thank you very much for your time.
Todd has one.
Yes, sir.
We have electric vehicle charging stations in various places around the state now. I was curious, who selected those locations for the current charging stations we have?
I believe those charging stations are generally private. So a lot of times what you have, the ones that you're seeing popping up, there could be some municipalities that have chosen to maybe place them into municipal parking garages, but in a lot of cases, those are privately operated, enterprises as well. So what we're seeing popping up right now is a private network. You see it specifically with Tesla. Tesla has their own construct, and they build some of the pricing into their vehicles. So some of their vehicle owners at certain levels actually have access to those charging stations going forward. So it's been private development.
Yeah. Okay. I know I've seen them at Kansas City Airport.
Just show the typical parking locations. They'll actually expand into showing safer vacant lots. I think as we tackle some of the other initiatives for safer parking in more congested areas like St. Louis or Kansas City, that could be really beneficial too for truck drivers throughout the state to find places to park outside of just the normal parking. So I'm really happy that you brought that up. I think it's a really pertinent topic.
Great. Thanks, Caitlin. Liz, thank you for your presentation.
Thank you all so much.
Great. Next up, from the Association of American Railroads, we have Mr. Ben Jones. Ben, appreciate you being here today, and look forward to your presentation. Great.
Me. And we'll have John come up here shortly. But I know in previous meetings you've heard from the rail industry. Jeff Davis with BNSF, who's here today, presented to you in Jeff City, talked a little bit more about more of the Missouri policy of what could be done to help from a logistics standpoint to grow freight railroads in the state. And then in St. Louis, you heard from Awesome to kind of give you a perspective for more of the short line and the St. Louis Terminal Railroad. So today, like I said, our intention is to give you more of a global perspective outside of the state borders of freight, what's happening in the industry, and how we're meeting the logistical challenges that are out there that we're all seeing. So with that, I'll turn that over to John Gray. He's the Senior Vice President of Policy and Economics for the the Association of American Railroads. He's been with the association 14 years. Before that, he had a long career in the freight railroad industry for a number of companies. Thank you.
Welcome.
Thanks, Ben, and thanks for the invitation. Appreciate it. If we could put up the presentation on it. Basically, what I'm going to talk about a little bit today is a little bit of the information behind how we got to where we are, you know, where we are in the process as we see the some of the supply chain problems, and a little bit about, you know, what the future might hold in some of these things. Now, the future part obviously is something that's very at risk, but again, a little bit of what the trends are that are going on right now. And if we could go to the first slide. Here we go. Okay. The first slide here. As I say, this is kind of in the beginning. And it all started with, you know, and this basically tells you who's responsible for the problem that we have in the supply chain today. And quite frankly, it's everybody in this room. It's all of us. We're the ones that created the problem. It's not an item of blame. It's just a simple reflection of the situation that everybody was in 2020. And this one slide is really important because it says that if you look at the household or the individual, rather, savings that was out there, it has been going on at creeping up from about 1 trillion up towards 1.5 trillion for the past three or 4 years before the pandemic started. Right as you went into the pandemic, people stopped having places to spend money, and these household savings almost tripled within a couple of months. And because of that, people started buying a lot of stuff. And when they started buying a lot of stuff, the merchants that supplied them and the people who supplied them also started buying a lot of stuff that all got into the supply chain very quickly without any place to put it. So that's kind of the basic story of how we started here. One of the important things on this graph is that, as you see, that's been coming back down just about to normal within the last few months. It had that one additional pop-up during the early 2021 disruptions that we had during the pandemic, but it is coming back down to normal now, and it's starting to stabilize in about the range you would expect with the changes from inflation and buying power. So it's about to stabilize back in that 1 to 1.5 trillion range. Now, incidentally, that sounds like a lot of money, but you divide it by 330 million, and you come out with about $4,500 a person out there in terms of the savings that was out in the individual average in the market. So let's take this and go the next step. And for our business, the rail intermodal business, which was the part of our business most affected by this, what happened here, here's what we saw. It turned out that it was this expenditure in goods, which we all expected it to be, that really increased during this time. And as a matter of fact, we are just now starting to see the expenditures in services get back to where they were in 2019, let alone where they would be on an inflation-adjusted basis going forward. And so, but as these services expenses start increasing and get back to where they are normally, we're seeing exactly what we saw in the chart before, that the savings has come down to the normal level, and we should be seeing a drop in the expenditures on goods. Now, that does not mean that we're going to see a drop immediately in the amount of freight that is trying to move through the system. And I'll tell you why on this. Because there has been so much sale of goods that the months of inventory that are on hand, which are normally about 1.5 times the sales for most large businesses, at least nationwide, has dropped down to where it's closer to just equal to 1 month's sales. And until that inventory is replenished, we're going to see a lot of freight moving through the system. And the difference between 1 and 1.5 is a lot of stuff out there. So problem's not over yet. It's just that the root cause seems to be over of it. We're still going to have to deal with what's coming through the system going forward. Now, as far as the details on our industry in particular, here's how we saw it. Here's how it moved for us. This is the dark stuff, the black lines, the vertical lines, are the intermodal movements in the system that we had. The green line is the number of ships that are holding what are called loitering now off of LA, off the harbor there. Okay, so we saw early in the pandemic, we saw this line of ships start to build up. And at the same time, we were seeing more and more traffic actually being handled by rail and off the docks in LA, even with the line of ships building up. So why was the line of ships building up? Well, it was because at that point in time, there were about 600 longshoremen that were out, usually with COVID symptoms or with the virus itself. And so you had a disconnect on the amount of ships that could be handled with what was coming into the system from all other sources. And so we saw this buildup of the traffic that we were having. By the time you started getting in the third and fourth quarter of 2020, early 2021, when you started getting the workforce back in LA and it started to started to come into play and start taking down those numbers. By that time, we were handling through the system about anywhere from 20 to about 40,000 containers a week, more than we normally handled, had been normally handling. We saw record months for all time in December and January and February. That's never happened before. December, those 3 months are usually the lowest months of the year. They were records in December 20, December and January and February of 21. They are all three record months. That's nothing like that has ever come close to happening before. And so we were handling huge amounts beyond what we had normally handled. But the interesting part on that is that we were not seeing congestion in the rail system itself at that time. But where we did start to see a buildup of traffic and where we did start to see congestion was in the intermodal terminals. So we started looking at some of the things that had changed. And I'm going to walk you through one of those things. It's not the only thing out there that changed, but it's very illustrative of how one small change that's made somewhere in the system can have a dramatic impact on what goes on elsewhere in the system. I think I am. Could we move a slide forward? It's not responding. There we go. Okay. This is how freight moved out of Los Angeles and coming to the Midwest and the East pre-pandemic and in a normal situation. About 35% of the freight that moved through Los Angeles or Long Beach was taken directly to rail. It was put on rail and shipped out as international business going to the Midwest and East. But about 65% of it went to warehouses somewhere in the LA basin. And at those warehouses, they didn't just take the freight in and ship it out to points in Southern California, Arizona, Northern California, what have you. What they did with it for a large part of it was take it into inventory in those warehouses. And then when they would order a rail domestic container for those warehouses for about 40% of that business that they took in, and in this rail domestic container, they would load material going directly to either a retailer or a wholesaler in the Midwest or East and sort it all there. Okay? They would do all the sorting on that end so that when the container got to the East or it got to the Midwest, it could be delivered directly to the either user or near end user. Okay? As things started building up out there, they ran out of the capacity to do that. And what happened was this. Okay? The ones that went, the containers going directly to rail continued to go directly to rail. They got into the end of the system, went to the east, were delivered just like they'd always been, directly to a warehouse that would do the sorting, the distribution. The ones that were going to the warehouses out in Los Angeles, though, they continued to go there because the steamship companies wanted their containers back, and they needed their containers back to move other freight, particularly since their containers were moving about 40 to 50% slower than they had a year before, and so they needed all they could get to move everything out there. So they wanted their containers back, so they continued to take it into the warehouses in LA, but instead of sorting it and put it in packages that could go directly for delivery in the Midwest and East, they started just taking it out of the international boxes, putting it into the domestic boxes, and just shipping it off for it to be sorted in the East or the Midwest. Meanwhile, those facilities in the East and Midwest are getting all this additional material that needs to be sorted, plus being overrun by the regular business that they have at the same time. And so that's when we started seeing the backup of containers and rail yards. And there's a rather famous, what has become rather famous photograph in the industry of a yard in Joliet, Illinois, that has 2 tracks blocked by nothing but containers sitting on it, 8,000-foot tracks, and they have nothing but containers stacked 3 high. So there's 3,000 containers in that stack that can't be delivered. Why can't they be delivered? Warehouses are full. Okay? No one's to blame. It's no one's to blame except the people that were buying a lot of stuff and the merchants that were responding to it. But the fact is that that's when you started getting the backup, and that, if you take it back to this slide, that's when we started seeing the shipping increase a lot out in LA. And we started seeing the slowdown. First of all, we started seeing the slowdown in what we could handle, and that was backing up into LA and limiting what could be handled there. Okay? Because when you realize that when all that's put together, about 60% of what comes across those docks in Los Angeles eventually goes to rail, one way or the other. When 60% of that can't move very well, it's going to back things up. So we get back to the same thing here. Okay? Where do we see this going? From our perspective, I think everyone that I have talked to would be surprised if we see the rate at which we can deliver pick up right now. Because that most of those warehouse backups are still there. And so we're working right now at about the 2019 normal level, okay? But that just means it's getting to the warehouse that was there, and it's going through, and they're moving at about the 2019 more normal level. But we still have this problem out there with the inventories, okay? Even if people stop buying stuff, the replacement of those inventories is going to keep us really busy for everybody quite a while into the future. What does quite a while in the future mean? My guess, and it's strictly a guess at this point, but seeing how it's moved in the past, minimum of this year. Minimum of this year. And that's just based around the way this is moved in the past and the way that, you know, the volumes that you've been able to handle. Because what you'll be doing is catching up at the catch-up times during the year. Normally, you see 2 or 3 peaks in a year. The biggest one by far is the Christmas peak in movement. That is usually over for our industry in about October. Christmas comes about the middle of October for us. Okay? And then it moves downstream until it gets to the retail outlets. So, you know, before that rush, we will work some off. Everybody will. And after that rush, we will work some off. I would suspect that we'll have a busy December, January, and February this year, but not as certainly not as busy as it was in 2020. And what it would be doing is working off some of this extra supply to get the inventories back up. And with that, I'm open for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Gray. Excellent presentation. I'm interested in the notion of whether you think that there's, because of the issues that we've had, and I thought that was a great way to lay them out, to understand. It also, for me, shapes the notion as to why there isn't necessarily economic activity in the industry, in the freight movement industry, to increase capacity, because, you know, it's working essentially a major lump through the system, if you will, that was caused by external, not really normal economic activity. And but I wonder also if the recovery won't be delayed if a lot of people start thinking, well, 1.5 months of inventory isn't sufficient because of the potential for issues. You know, now we've got the conflict in the Ukraine, so we might have people trying to hold more inventory just in case of economic shocks. So this may well continue at this pace for longer than just that getting back to normal.
That's kind of the best case in this, quite frankly. Yeah, you know, all the disruptions that we're seeing now, and not necessarily economic disruptions, but disruptions that you know, trigger uncertainty with buying, trigger uncertainty in the marketplace. That's all going to continue. That every time we have something like that, you mentioned the war. Yeah, that's going to be there. The inflation problems that we're having right now, that's going to influence how quickly that comes back together. The other reason, though, that the people I've talked to have talked about in terms of why you don't have a lot of investment just to build up a lot of new facilities or anything like that is pretty simple. One, it takes time. It takes a long time to do it, as you well know. You're in the business of big projects too, and so you understand exactly how that works. The other part of it, though, is that we know there's going to be a difference in the way things are done after this. compared to the way it was done before it. If nothing else, we know that there's going to be a lot more of the internet buying. We've seen that ourselves. Normally, the traffic that we handle on trailers is not almost exclusively, but probably 60 to 70% of it at least is for small package carriers, of one brand or another. And if you look at the trailer business, it went from about 6,000 trailers a week in 2019 up to 25,000 trailers a week in 2020 and 2021. And almost all of that was new small package freight. You see a train go by that has trailers on it instead of the containers. And you'll see that almost all of them are carrying a label of one of the package carriers. And that's not the sum of it, because we know that particularly the largest one that we handle is converting the containers. And so more and more of their freight is showing up as containers on the train. And it's not as obvious. But we know that it is changing, and it's going to be very different when we get through this. Probably more of the internet buying that we will see, and so more of the needs for the local delivery of that internet buying within the U.S. That's going to change some patterns, and we are not sure what those patterns are going to be yet. I don't think anybody is.
Right. We've got a question from Caitlin.
Thanks, Director. Thank you so much for the presentation. It was really insightful. And I wanted to bring up a point. I think you're absolutely correct in what's happening on the West Coast, where a lot of the transloaded containers are going to warehouses to be transloaded into domestic rail. And I really wanted to let everyone know too, the experience that we have and the reason why we have to do that. So it's such a interconnected cycle. So if we book a container from Asia, let's say to St. Louis, typically what has happened is the steamship line provides the rate via rail inland service from the port of entry to the destination, like St. Louis. And what was happening is, the ocean containers were starting to get delayed, and the carriers had less and less empty containers to bring back to, or export containers loaded to. So what was happening is you started to see that the carriers stopped offering any rail service. And that was another huge reason why there's been this massive push for transloading. And now we typically, as a freight forwarder, we opt to go with transloading and trucking for our clients in most cases because it's a really fast turnaround. However, I do want to applaud Union Pacific because I went to them and said, listen, how do we overcome these issues? If we don't want to bring more cargo into an overloaded warehouse on the West Coast and we want to keep it in an ocean container, will you guys work with us directly? We'll do the negotiation with the steamship lines to cut off those containers at a certain destination point in the Midwest. And Union Pacific has been one of the first railroads that has stepped up and said, we are going to start looking into contracting with NVOCCs and not just steamship lines. So I will say, I think the rail is becoming more and more diversified in their business, and I think that that's really going to help as well, because really it's when the railroads and the steamship lines and the beneficial cargo owners and the NVOCCs all come together is when we're going to find a solution. So I really appreciate your presentation because it was a really good perspective on what the rail is up against with everything post-pandemic. So I really appreciate it.
Yeah, and as I say on it, it's not something where you can play a blame game. It's everybody trying to maneuver individual pieces in willingness to make things work. And so it's in a sense, given that there was about 20% more cargo in the national system, trying to get through the national system during the past year and a half, 2 years, than we had in 2019. I'm amazed that it's worked as well as it has.
Yeah. And I'll just add too really quickly, one solution that we're really looking at with the rail is to kind of bypass some of the issues with the equipment owned by steamship lines that's causing this sort of we can't ship on the rail if the steamship line tells us this is their equipment and they want it to stay in Los Angeles. One thing we're looking at from the very origin is getting into the shipper-owned container market, which I think could be a huge benefit for the railroads, the freight railroads in the United States to look at contracting with NVOCCs for the rail portion of shipper-owned containers. I think that that's going to be a really interesting market to look at.
And that goes along with what I was saying, that we know that the post-pandemic market is going to be different from the pre-pandemic. And that people are just going to change the way that they operate to give themselves more flexibility going forward.
Thank you.
Thank you. Todd, you had a question?
Yes, a question. When we were just simply buried with internet orders, obviously we first heard about backups, tremendous backups in LA and Long Beach, and then we heard some, not as much, but we heard some in regard to Savannah. And when we look at this broader issue, it's pretty clear that we simply buried those ports, and with them realistically not having the ability to handle the volume that's come through, and it certainly was an issue for all modes of transportation. Have you seen, I'm curious if you've seen any efforts underway for some of the shippers from the east using ports other than LA and Long Beach and or Savannah? Have you seen any shift in that direction? And would that sort of not be a reasonably, a feasible solution to, the gridlock that, can be ongoing?
It is a potential solution for some traffic. There is traffic going through LA and Long Beach that is not necessarily the most efficient way. However, what is important about LA and Long Beach from the steamship company perspective is that they can turn a ship in 6 weeks, port to port to port, there. If they go through the canal from where most of this stuff is coming from, which is Southeast Asia, if they go through the canal to the East Coast, they turn a ship in closer to about 10 weeks. And you get less productivity out of the ship. You don't get as much more money out of it as you lose in productivity to send it around to the East Coast. And so it's on the surface it sounds like a good idea. In reality, often very tentative idea.
That's great. Mr. Gray, thank you so much for your presentation. Ben Jodes from UP, thank you for being here as well. We're going to move next to the regional efforts in automated vehicles from Amanda Greer from Mid-America Regional Council, a great partner here in the Kansas City area, and they're doing some great work to plan for the transportation and regional development that's going on. It's an exciting time. It's a lot of work going on and more money coming. So I'll turn the floor over to you, Amanda.
Great, thank you. For those of you who I have not met before, I'm Amanda Grayer. I'm the Chief Innovation Officer at the Mid-America Regional Council, which is the metropolitan planning organization for the bi-state Kansas City region. What I'm going to talk about today is three separate things. I don't know if you want me to come back to the electric charging station conversation that we started just before I dive into this.
That'd be great.
Yeah, so we actually started in the Kansas City region planning for electric vehicle readiness almost 15 years ago. We started with some initial campaigns alongside our Clean Cities Coalition in Kansas City and our Metropolitan Energy Center. A lot of the locations of the current charging stations were driven by decisions between Evergy and their customers. And so there are a number of private sector locations, shopping centers, things like that, but also a lot of employers jumped on board to have charging stations available for their employees. They also ran a lot of outreach campaigns through vehicle dealerships, making sure there was availability for people. If you talk about what you can get and then they can't buy it anywhere, that's a problem. And so there were multiple avenues that we've worked through over more than a decade on the electric vehicle readiness front in the Kansas City region. But I will say Evergy has been a huge driver in the region from their own planning efforts. Obviously, it opens up a whole new customer market for them. They're not doing it completely altruistically, but you know, it's a lot of the outreach efforts too have been around lower utility costs overnight, charging at home, like that model, and building codes. What kind of building codes need to happen to not necessarily require new housing to have a charging station there, but to have it wired in such a way that it can be installed easier. So there's home builders and other associations that have all been involved in the discussion over an extended period of time. So I mean, that could be its own presentation in and of itself, but that's not what I'm here to talk about this afternoon.
Well, thanks for filling in on that for us.
Absolutely.
Great to have that expertise.
So the first thing I want to talk about is our regional autonomous vehicle policy framework. We started developing this in about 2017. And we went through a roughly 18-month stakeholder engagement process. We looked at 7 different policy areas under this work. We looked at travel demand management and system performance, infrastructure planning and investment, land use and environment, data management, equitable access and mobility services, workforce and economic opportunity, and certification, liability, and insurance. And the purpose of this process was not necessarily to answer all the questions about this stuff, because nobody has the answers to all of these things right now. But it was to make sure that as a region, we were asking the same questions and looking in the same direction and making sure that we were all trying to figure out the same things and not working in parallel or in tension with one another and our private sector industry, our public safety organizations. And so this working group, this stakeholder group that we had, it included not just transportation planners and city folks, but it also included real estate and developers. It included highway patrols and local police departments. It included representatives from aging and adult senior centers in the region, just a wide range of folks over these topic areas. So when we talked about travel demand management and system performance, we looked a lot at the issues of the speed of transition, the assumptions in travel demand modeling, and related to the percentage of fleet adoption. We think in some cases travel demand modeling overestimated, early models overestimated that transition. The automakers were a lot more bullish on how quickly these would come to market about 5 years ago than they are right now. We looked at the private ownership versus the fleet-based model and the anticipation that a lot of autonomous vehicles, especially early, would be more in that fleet-based model, that people wouldn't necessarily buy autonomous vehicles and have them sitting in their driveways or try to Airbnb essentially them out, have a model where they might be renting them during the day, but that essentially it was more like a zip car model. If you're familiar with that, where it's hourly, it's rentals, you don't, a company owns the vehicles and people pay to use them for a shorter period of time rather than individual ownership all the time. We also looked at the cost of travel, whether there would be changes in access, equity, or the perception of transportation costs. So when you buy a car, you might have a monthly car payment for a little bit. You've got your insurance that you have to pay for either monthly or every 6 months. You have your registration fees, things like that. But if you are buying into a fleet model and you're paying every time you use a vehicle, even if the ultimate cost ends up being lower, does it feel like it's more expensive because it's more transactional and you're paying every time you take that transportation rather than the sort of sunk cost fallacy of, I've already paid for this vehicle and therefore I'm going to use it, thinking about the true cost of all your transportation options. And then the anticipated increase in vehicle miles traveled and the associated impact on existing travel goals. We have long-range transportation plans across the state that include goals around decreased vehicle miles traveled. So if we start incorporating autonomous vehicles and they're deadheading around looking for the next ride, and they actually increase the vehicle miles traveled because of that, how does that pair with our existing regional goals on transportation? As far as infrastructure planning and investment are concerned, we looked a lot at our ability to replace lost existing revenue streams, such as fuel taxes. There was an anticipation that autonomous vehicles, they're not going to build gas-powered autonomous vehicles. They will be largely electric. It's a lot easier to charge them, that they will be primarily electric vehicles. Also, what are the impacts on parking and land use with our existing infrastructure? We'll talk about this a little bit in the next study that I'm going to go over as well, but how do we maximize our existing infrastructure and system capacity without making wholesale changes to the built environment? There were concerns about state or federal preemption of local planning and pilot projects or unfunded required work in anticipation of autonomous vehicles, but also the potential for large safety improvements if implemented thoughtfully. So making sure, excuse me, that we are anticipating what potential negative interactions there might be with other modes, especially during that transition period, but acknowledging that once these devices all talk to each other and are aware of each other and don't rely on human vision, line of sight, a periphery that only goes so far, that there is the potential for large safety improvements. As we looked at the land use and environment implications, we talked a lot about how autonomous vehicles will impact existing goals related to creating quality places, center and corridor planning, density, mixed-use development, a lot of the movement in local government planning moving in that direction. These cities have existing land use plans. How does this interact with the plans that they've already laid for their individual jurisdictions? We also looked at the possibility of reclamation of land from the transportation system to green space or other green infrastructure improvements. If we've maximized our system capacity on highways and we can fit more vehicles in existing lanes because they can be closer together and actually use the existing capacity more, do we need to keep adding lanes, or can we talk about how we may reclaim some of that land from the transportation system? We looked at the changes to operations of existing infrastructure, a lot about pickup and drop-off zones, things that could be implemented now, even with human-driven vehicles, that can benefit autonomous vehicles later. So having designated pickup and drop-off areas, especially as it relates to event planning, maybe it's not an all-time pickup and drop-off area, but in a suburban farmers market, for example, the Overland Park Farmers Market has one of the worst parking issues every Saturday and Sunday morning during the summer. How can we work in some of these curb space operational decisions now that can then help ease the transition into autonomous vehicle usage? On the data management front, we talked a lot about the liability of third-party use of data, the privacy of individual travel patterns and behaviors. If you think about it, it's a fleet model now, so a company or an organization will now have all of this information about if you're going back and forth from home to work, if you're taking side trips. That is now data that someone has. Well, if you carry a phone with you, someone already has that data, but it's not quite as, it's not coming from the vehicle. Can and should local governments try to monetize data? This is $1 million question that is still being asked, and how should that happen? If it can or should happen, how should that happen? There's a lot of issues with data sharing for insights and not this for the sake of sharing large amounts of data. So when we talk about big data, and I'll touch on this in the Heartland Freight Technology Plan work next too, there's a lot of information, but do you really need all 90,000 data points that you get from an autonomous vehicle? Probably not. Let's pull out the most useful ones and have an actual use for the data before we talk about storing it somewhere and ingesting it. And realistically, on the data management front, jurisdictions are at widely varying levels in their current ability to participate in this kind of work. You've got the larger jurisdictions that have the staff and the technical capacity to engage in the conversation. You've got a lot of smaller, both urban and rural jurisdictions that just don't have the staff to look at this kind of stuff because they're dealing with what's in front of them right now. And so how do we make sure that the discussion truly is regional and truly brings in partners, even if they can't send a staff person to participate in a technical study every time, they'll be impacted by the decisions that are made at every level of this discussion. I won't go too deep into, I know we're all trying for opening day, so I won't go too deep into all of the policy areas, but I do want to focus on workforce and economic opportunity in particular with our AV policy framework. We know that Kansas City has a strong engineering and architecture base, and we can leverage that for attracting new employers and technology-related jobs specific to autonomous vehicles in the region. GM and Ford have significant presence there. How do we make sure that they are part of this conversation? Because they will they are the ones who will be manufacturing some of these vehicles. So making sure that we use that as a selling point for the Kansas City region to attract those types of jobs. There is the potential for job loss in multiple industries, but also the potential for new workforce in certain areas that are struggling to attract workers currently. The fear of job loss specifically in the freight sector might be mitigated by indications that human interaction is still going to be necessary at many steps of the process, specifically origin and destination functions. We'll still need people at both ends of that process, whether it is whether there's a driver in the vehicle or not. There are a lot of changes to traditionally low-tech jobs that are transitioning to higher tech needs, and local manufacturing readiness to begin producing electric or other high-tech vehicles is not there yet. It is a priority in this plan to start looking at that local manufacturing readiness to prepare for these eventual needs. And then finally, autonomous vehicles could provide increased job access. If it's extending the transit system without increasing cost to the transit system, there's a potential for first and last mile really useful additions to the transit system, and that could provide increased job access in that way. We made some primary recommendations from all of those working groups. Every single one of those had a different set of people that were ingrained in those efforts. And the 5 primary recommendations that came out of that work were the ongoing need for regional stakeholder education, whether it's workforce, whether it's the general public, whether it's elected bodies. There just wasn't enough consistent information out there on this topic and that continues to be the case. We wanted to look early at land use policies. So we're talking about parking, curb sharing, pickup and drop-offs. This is significant for the reasons that we've already talked about today. A lot more home deliveries, a lot more, when you have a multifamily building and you've got a FedEx truck that sits outside a 15-story building delivering half a truckload of packages because 50 people in that building have all ordered something that gets delivered on the same day before Christmas. You've got to think about how the curb sharing happens. How does parking happen? How do you manage that curb space with an emphasis on state of good repair for all users? So in the outreach that we did on this and in the stakeholder feedback we got, the recommendation from the OEMs in particular was don't make any big changes to your built infrastructure right now. We are working with what the construct that is already there, the signage, that kind of stuff. Make sure your lanes are painted. Make sure your roads are in good condition. Make sure your curbs are whole. Make sure you've got, bike lanes whenever possible to separate traffic so there's not decreasing the points of tension. Make sure your crosswalks are painted. Those are the kinds of things that were recommended most fully from the tech companies because that will help the vehicles operate more safely. Pricing strategies, again, operational, parking, registration, vehicle use. How does this change the revenue model for transportation if everyone's buying into a fleet versus having their own personal vehicle? Regional and multi-jurisdictional data sharing, making sure that we have robust and effective data sharing agreements in place. And then finally, equitable access to services in the transportation system. Don't implement technology just for the sake of it, making sure that, oftentimes you'll have an app to access a transit system or these types of vehicles requiring someone to have a smartphone with a data plan that is not used up and a credit card, so they requires them to be banked in order to access the transportation system. Making sure that we're not actually decreasing access in the name of technology. So we have the Heartland Freight Technology Plan, which Chris was a part of, and he's probably going to recognize a lot of this stuff, so I'm just going to fly through some of the sections that the Heartland Freight Technology Plan was the intent of it was to deliver a prioritization framework for new technologies, goals and strategies for harmonizing regulation, and recommendations for data management and sharing, along with a blueprint for action and implementation of these efforts. This was part of Federal Highway's National Economic Partnerships Grant Program, and it was developed through a partnership of 6 metropolitan planning organizations, 5 state DOTs, and the Heartland Civic Collaborative. There is feedback in here with academic, business, and industry leaders, and I'm going to go over some of the highlights of that planning work. There were a couple different memos, and all of this is available on the MARC website, so there's a lot more detail available. But one of the memos that was created as part of this was the Economic Nodes and Drivers Tech Memo. And the purpose of this particular task within that project was to provide a description of the freight flows, economies, supply chains, and market linkages within the study area to help define the needs and opportunities of the whole plan. The study area for this was all of the counties in Missouri, Nebraska, Kansas, and Iowa, as well as the counties in Illinois that are part of their Region 5 of the Illinois Department of Transportation. So the implications for freight technology that came out of this plan acknowledge that much of the economic activity within the Heartland region occurs within the region's nodal metropolitan areas. Urban delivery technologies for conventional e-commerce applications are significant, with robotics being one example, but the areas adjacent to the Heartland nodes rank as the largest or second largest trading partner by freight tonnage and value. So therefore, the connections between the nodes and the surrounding areas is a strategic consideration as far as this plan is concerned. And one technology that these connections are particularly suited to is electric trucks. The relatively short travel distances align with the operating range of the technology and the contemporary battery capacity, and adoption of the electric trucks opens up questions such as power grid capacity for charging stations and revenue replacement for gas taxes. Rural areas also account for a majority of the Heartland study area. I just mentioned the 4-state region that it looked at. And in that case, unmanned aerial vehicles or drones have particular use in these districts, whether it's for road inspection or e-commerce deliveries, as we've talked about before. Trade between the nodes within the regions, the metropolitan areas, is relatively weak, and the top trading partners by value are mainly outside the region. And so long distance connections between the region and other parts of the nation are a key consideration and used by pass-through freight as well. And so technologies ranging from truck platooning to positive train control and its influence on railroad crew sizes are relevant for this study, as are multi-state information systems for uses such as truck parking availability and regulatory compliance, some of the things that have already been touched on today. Agriculture, the Heartland region is obviously well known for its agriculture production, but overall, manufacturing, wholesale, and retail trade represent a larger share of economic activity among freight-dependent industries. And so food and agriculture products are traded industries, so these industries compete with other regions and nations. And the delivered cost is crucial to the competitiveness of Heartland products in national and global markets. Technology innovations in the lower cost rail and water modes that have key roles for these markets are incredibly important, and container vessels for inland waterways are one example that the Heartland agencies have been tracking. Data and data systems are an essential enabler of most of the new technology. And so some examples and issues are numerous. So we have driver information systems for communications of conditions and ultimately for vehicle to infrastructure networks. The public-private data sharing, such as hard braking locations collected from truck telematics, high-speed data capacity for rural areas, and supporting participation in e-commerce and distributed manufacturing and for supply chain visibility everywhere are some of the issues that this particular study looked at. The feedback that we got on a lot of this was that collaborative actions begin with the importance of unified policy across the region. Even though individual trucks may stay within a given locale, carriers running them and industries buying their services have larger footprints, and standard approaches are necessary for efficiency. The designation of EV corridors is needed to guide the deployment of charging stations, likely by private industries supported by utilities, as we've already talked about. Even though operating ranges are constrained today, they can be combined into relays and lengthened as technology evolves. Collaboration with the private sector encompasses the option for joint ventures and the use of NGOs or non-governmental organizations as intermediaries for protected sharing of data and information, including truck operating profiles that affect where electric vehicles will work best and how they should be supported. As it stands, public agencies are not well known to most motor carriers outside of regulatory requirements. So when we talk about this coordinated planning, with 90% of trucking companies owning no more than 6 trucks, engaging with them requires the right people at the agencies to be simple to find and outreach efforts to be specifically targeted to small firms. Education of agency and political leadership is needed so they are motivated, knowledgeable, and can act together. And agency rosters should incorporate personnel with the requisite background and technical skills. One of the other areas, one of the working groups with this technology plan development was looking at coordinating long distance technology and interoperability of freight carriage across Heartland jurisdictions. The Heartland has experience with 2 interagency programs. One we've already mentioned, actually both have already been mentioned, Kansas City Scout which manages traffic operations and information in the bi-state area, as well as the Truck Parking and Information Management System, which is a joint effort of 8 Midwestern states, including 4 from the Heartland, to provide real-time information to truck drivers about the availability of parking at designated facilities on major freight corridors. And these states are all part of the Mid-America Association of State Transportation Officials, or MASTO. Attracting and sustaining collaboration with industry was a pretty significant concern as part of this. Some agencies give their freight advisory committees a role in prioritizing the use of funds for projects, which is a way to demonstrate the value to the private sector in return for use of their time. There are some other policy levers that are indicated, but basically organization of a regional approach to technology is warranted, beneficial, and best done in cooperation with the private sector. There are 2 technologies from this study that rose to the top as promising candidates for initial focus. Those were the Advanced Driver Assistance Systems, or ADAS systems, in the safety category, and the truck electrification under energy. Electric trucks are in the field stage of development, should move into adoption within a few years, but they are worthy of attention now as some of those long-standing barriers to widespread adoption really start eroding through the projects that we've talked about already today. Electric utilities who are targeting new market opportunities are leading efforts needed to develop the charging infrastructure, but proper policy and planning collaboration can help remove some of those policy barriers. Touching back on the sort of commercial vehicle use of the charging stations that we were talking about before, one of the big policy barriers initially was the fact that with energy being a regulated industry, you could not resell electricity. And so retail locations would want to charge for the electricity, but they would find ways around it, such as charging for parking and not charging the direct electricity because they could not resell the electricity at their location. So that's been a long discussion with the Kansas Corporation Commission and Missouri Public Service Commission. It's a known issue, and movement has been made to alleviate that, but that will be an issue with truck parking as well, is the reselling, that regulatory environment of reselling electricity. This project would not have been successful were it not for stakeholder input, and there was stakeholder input from a number of organizations, a few of them being Smartport, but also BNSF, the Consumer Brands Association, the Supply Chain Innovation Forum, YRC Freight, Evergy, Ameren, INRIX, a number of others that I will not name right now, but there was industry feedback given in this. And some of the main, like what we heard most was divided into 4 categories, which was input on emerging technologies, input on data, input on policy, and general stakeholder guidance. On emerging technologies, we heard, again, from industry that transportation is weaning itself from oil. The electric truck is coming, first to light and medium duty fleets, and then to Class 8 heavy duty local and regional markets. Electric power distribution infrastructure must be further developed, standardized, and implemented. Charging stations will become the new truck stops, and truck stops will become significant electric power consumers. Autonomous trucks are far enough in the future, but drones or UAVs are more likely to fill the gap in inspection roles or local delivery of certain goods, and public agencies can help by digitizing road network attribute data. Digital supply chains are advancing and will have secondary effects on transportation infrastructure. For example, visibility to capacity and demand, coupled with artificial intelligence, is increasing logistics and efficiency, but end-to-end visibility of shipment and vehicle status is both required and expected at this point by shippers, carriers, and the public sector. Let's see, railroads really have no plans at this point to place beacons on every object comprising and using the rail network, and also raised a concern that widespread electrification could result in electromagnetic interference and disrupt other technologies that are currently in use. For consumer packaged goods manufacturers, automation is a key emerging technology, not limited to vehicles. Automation like robots in the warehouse and artificial intelligence systems to monitor quality are gaining foothold in the consumer packaged goods space. But perhaps the biggest change in transportation logistics, and it's been touched on already this morning or this afternoon, is the shift to smaller, more frequent shipments and direct-to-home shipments. Freight and people movement interactions will increase as a result of changing supply chain dynamics such as e-commerce, direct-to-consumer, and same-day delivery, which is creating parking issues in metropolitan areas as delivery vehicles stop to deliver on nearly every street. Parking strategies and infrastructure are important considerations, and policies for road sharing are also important as cities move to more sustainable and possibly automated transportation modes. And workforce issues are present in the aging population of the aging of the truck driver population. Above all, data are crucial. Bilateral data sharing is becoming more acceptable, and public agencies are positioned to benefit both as a supplier and a consumer of the data. Streamlined interchanges of data are necessary to create a share once, use many approach that works across regions and jurisdictions. But digitizing infrastructure attributes such as lane details, work zone information, and road conditions is increasingly important. We're going to skip past some of this in the interest of time. Federal harmonization of regulations and standards is important to smooth and efficient operations, but also developing programs to highlight and differentiate emerging technologies are also beneficial. So for example, a green choice program to have your freight moved via an electric fleet would help marketing and branding aspects of new technologies and their adoption. Technology can simplify enforcement and monitoring activities, from hours of service to toll collection to equipment inspections and weight limits, and carriers benefit by eliminating lost time at these inspection and collection points. Public employees must be equipped, though, and able to operate in this digital world to provide those services. And a real question is who will pay for the needed infrastructure. From more reflective and visible roadway markings to signage to improved sensing networks, simply mandating solutions for industry without involving the impacted parties is ineffective. A forward movement requires many voices and hands pointing in the same direction. There's no single case where something meaningful occurred where one entity mentioned at one time, and it takes a broad and willing coalition to get policy movement. I'm going to wrap up my comments there, and I'm happy to take any questions if you have them. As I mentioned before, all of these studies are available on the MARC website in full, and so they can be viewed there, but I'm also happy to answer questions if you have them.
Excellent presentation. I'm curious your take. I work in the truckload side of transportation, and the autonomous question about what are we seeing from a research and development standpoint? It comes up very frequently when interacting with customers, particularly in an environment like we've seen here recently where capacity is tight. But what I'm really curious about your take is that when you mention that autonomous commercial vehicles are far in the future, what's your take on that? Is that, do you have any kind of context around what we're looking at?
From a freight standpoint, there are a few manufacturers that are already building and delivering electric trucks. They're on the road now. There is a lot of research that still needs to get done on how they operate, extreme cold or extreme heat. How does that impact battery life? As we mentioned, the truck stop electrification piece is a huge element of that. And so I think right now they're looking mostly at sort of short haul type trips. The long haul trips are not particularly well suited in this moment. That said, battery technology has come a really long way in a short amount of time. And so as far as this study was concerned, which some of it was done, it wrapped up, I think in 2021 was the end of this. So it's relatively recent. It anticipated in the next 5 years there would be significantly increased availability of electric trucks available to market.
Yeah, I think the other area I see on this, and I receive a lot of questions about, is really around the safety side of this. And, when you think about it, I'm probably oversimplifying this, but, we've been flying planes for a long time that go from A to B almost completely by themselves, but we still put two pilots in the cockpit, right? So when you think about putting an 80,000-pound vehicle on the road and being completely autonomous, I think there's a lot of questions around safety. And as I feel questions, a lot of them are around how do we get more confidence out there with the motoring public around these vehicles being safe. And you started out your presentation talking about peripherals and a lot of those kind of things today that perhaps could improve the safety that we see today with vehicles that are manned. So, I think as we think about moving forward and talking about autonomous vehicles, the more we can educate the public and the interested parties about the benefits of autonomous vehicles, not only from perhaps, an emissions standpoint on the electrical side, but as well as the safety side, I think will continue to be important.
Yeah, it's an interesting time in the market right now because on the passenger side of vehicles, for autonomous vehicles, you hear about every single negative interaction a Tesla has, no matter what state it happens in. And those aren't even really realistically fully autonomous or shouldn't be treated as a fully autonomous vehicle. When there are human-involved crashes on roadways in multiples every single day. And so part of it is what gets elevated to the level of being news and what is just accepted as standard practice right now. And I think there's an awful lot of information and a lot of Vision Zero policies as well that speak to the potential for increased safety, that especially on interstate and high-speed roadways, that could come from more automation in both the passenger and the goods movement areas.
Thank you.
Really great presentation. Really appreciate you being here and for the work that you've done. I mean, this is tremendous work. I would anticipate that we'll be pulling in some of your good work into this study. So thank you so much for being here.
Sure.
We're gonna, I hope you don't mind, we're gonna switch this up a little. One of our presenters is online, and so we're gonna move up the container on vessel discussion with Sal Latrico from American Patriot Holdings. Sal, really appreciate you being here today. I know you're, as all of our panelists and presenters are busy, but thank you for being with us, and we look forward to your presentation.
Absolutely. Thank you, and I appreciate the opportunity to present today. I wish I could be there in person, but thank you for this opportunity. How much time do I have so I can gauge this?
We can go probably 15 to 20 minutes, I think,
Okay.
If that'll work for you.
Absolutely. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give an update, basically overlay of the project, and then just leave the rest of the time for you all to ask questions as necessary. So I am really going to go over this pretty quickly just to hit the wave tops. Please stop me if you have a question, or we can wait until the end, whatever is more convenient for you. But I just want to kind of package this a little bit of where the project is, what is the project, and what does it bring it to the table, and then open it up from there. So good afternoon, and I'm going to talk about our Midwest logistics alternative. We are creating a new transportation alternative for containerized cargo. It's got three major components, and that's a regional gateway terminal at the lower Mississippi River, connected to state-of-the-art strategic container terminals in the Midwest, connected to a state-of-the-art patented container on vessel, and collectively, it brings significant cost advantages, which I'll talk about as I walk through this. This has been 7 years in the making, and we have launched our project. This is the presentation we used for the governor in December to give him an update, who's extremely interested in our project. So again, this is the same project, but I updated it. So whoever is doing the slides, please, next one. Thank you. You can go ahead and go to the next one. So what we're going to talk about is basically the battleground states, the pre-pandemic, and the expansion of the Panama Canal. Most East Coast, West Coast, everybody's vying for how do we get to the Midwest? How do we try to do this now that these larger vessels can go through the Gulf of Mexico? West Coast and East Coast all have inherent issues. The West Coast, we've got union issues, automation issues, trucking issues, green footprint issues, and it really inhibits them from trying to expand to the next step. At the same time, you have to realize in the next 10 years, the projected growth for containerized cargo is almost double, significant amount of cargo. So not only is there an issue today, but when you look at growth each and every year, it's just going to compound the problem. East Coast has similar issues, but not to the magnitude that the West Coast does. These problems are not going to go away. They're going to continue to be there. So a true new alternatives necessary, and the Gulf region has not been a player because of the Panama Canal restrictions. With that now open, it's total green door. And the approach we've taken is to create a new system. And the three key components will line up, and I'll explain that in a moment. Next slide, please. So why does this benefit the nation? It really gives another alternative other than rail. Everybody understands there's rail issues out there. There's dependency on the West Coast. Green footprint. We're also bringing a green footprint. Our whole system is green, and we can service the largest container vessels being built in the world today. And when you couple that with a new marine inland transportation option to compete against rail and trucking, and what we've taken into consideration is the vessel's reliability, speed, cargo, what we call critical mass, And truly, it's all about the lowest landed cost. Next one, please. So the first leg is our regional gateway terminal. It's at mile 55 in the Mississippi River. It will save the ocean carriers a half a day between transits back and forth and significant dollars in pilotage fees to come to this new terminal that has zero operational restrictions. It's at full build out. It can handle 3 20,000 plus TEU container vessels plus 2 of our vessels, 7 unit trains, fully intermodal warehouse distribution center, significant footprint. And this is very important to have intermodal connectivity. Next slide, please. The second leg is our strategic partners in the Midwest. Same DNA. We try to have the same operating footprint as much as possible, and we're not in competition with each other. We are providing a service for our customers. How do we work with each other to get to the lowest landed cost and optimizing logistics? Our first phase of operation will be from the Louisiana Gulf Gateway to Memphis. That's a 6.2 round trip, 6.2 days round trip compared to at least 15 days on the conventional towboats. Significant speed advantages. Right now, we have enough contractual arrangements for 4 dedicated vessels to operate between Memphis and Lag, and we're now working on option 2, which I'll talk about a little bit later. Next slide, please. Our vessel is a container arm vessel. It is purpose-built to carry critical mass at very high speed, so again, contributing towards the net result of the lowest cost. This vessel can carry significant amount of cargo compared to other alternatives today. Next slide. So how is it happening today? Today is container on barge, and it's working pretty good. Smaller scale, short distances, lower volumes. We anticipate, and we've had discussions with container on barge companies to partner with them to be what we're calling shuttle vessels, to basically shuttle small amount of cargoes into the system so that we can try to optimize the smaller cargo lots and bring them into the big system. In order for our system to work, these big ships today coming in are over $200,000 a day of operating cost. They're not going to wait on containers. It's got to be dedicated on-time scheduled service. And to be able to do that, we have to have the amount of volume on time each and every day down at the Louisiana Gulf Gateway Terminal. So we see a good opportunity to partner with container on barge, but what we need, next slide, please, is a vessel that can carry critical mass, high speeds. For example, this vessel can do 13 miles an hour upriver against the current versus 4 to 5 miles an hour conventional vessel. And this vessel here can carry almost 2,400 TEU. It burns LNG, so it's got a total green footprint and diversified cargo. We can carry refrigerated cargo. This is our liner vessel that will operate between Cairo, Memphis, and St. Louis. No locks involved. So its beam is 134 feet, so it can't fit in the locks. Next slide, please. So in anticipating for tributary rivers like Joliet, Kansas City, Jefferson City, and Fort Smith, all of the locks in the United States are 600 by 110. So this vessel's 595 by 106. So it'll fit like a glove. It has all the same efficiencies as the bigger vessel, but it's built to go through lower bridges. It's built to go through high, low water conditions, and it's built to be able to go through all the tributary rivers. Again, 13 miles an hour, less density on the cargo, about 1,864 TEUs. It also, burns LNG, and it does diversified cargo for reefer as well. Next slide, please. So just to give you some examples, our first port is Memphis. I'm bringing this up here because it's really kind of the example that's setting the trade here. This port's got 700 acres. It's already in service. We're just going to modify it to be a state-of-the-art container terminal. What's important here is for phase 1, we have enough cargo through several what we call BCOs, beneficial cargo owners, to support the project. 4 vessels, this terminal connected to Lower Mississippi, which we're calling LAG. So this is kind of a footprint, and we're going to use the same thing for St. Louis and some of the other ports in Missouri. Next slide, we can go through this very quickly. Don't worry about that. They've got an LOI signed. We're getting ready to have a definitive agreement. Our St. Louis footprint is Herculaneum. We're in the process of finalizing the LOIs and going to a definitive agreement to meet our operational date. This is a great location, and this vessel can take either the hybrid or the liner, same as Memphis as well. A lot of engineering's been done, and we're excited about this site as well. Next one. Go ahead. Next one. Thank you. Kansas City, well along. They have really been working on this. They're probably ahead of the curve. They have 400-acre footprint. Again, service between Kansas City, Jefferson City. What we need to make sure is that we have year-round water depths that we can operate 12 months a year. Our vessel, our hybrid vessel, can operate at 7 feet. So if there's low water conditions, we can light load that. The problem with that is we carry less cargo. That doesn't help our efficiencies or optimization. So we don't want to get to that situation. So we're working on trying to make sure, how do we make sure that there's enough water in the Missouri River? There's a task force going on right now. Richard Grenville from Kansas City, I know, is working and taking the lead on this. Higher traffic density with more sophisticated vessels is getting the Corps' attention. And I think may be able to say, okay, with enough traffic density, maybe this merits we take another look at how do we make this more reliable. Next slide. Go ahead. Next slide. Jefferson City is a little bit, they're still in the infancy stage. They're finding locations, but this is a real possibility. On the Missouri River, being able to do a 2-port call, Jefferson City and Kansas City, and have several vessels operating in that footprint. So they're moving along. I think there's some expectations there. They're working on cargo and so forth. Next slide. Next one. Okay, so we did 2 pre-feasibility studies to look at our competitiveness compared intermodal rail. So basically, cargo today, containerized cargo today, by rail or truck to the West Coast or East Coast, how did we compare to that? 2 different studies. One was from Informa Economics, the Soy Transportation Coalition did a study. They paid for it. Basically, they're all export cargo, agricultural product. How did we stack up to that? And then the other is CK Americas, which looked at cargo going both ways and how did our intermodal how did our transportation model work against intermodal rail? And I'll get to the results in a minute. You have to keep in mind that these numbers were done before the pandemic, okay? Before this big, huge supply chain problem that's out there. And I'll give you an illustration. In the past, an average rate, Caitlin, I know you can validate this for me, but an imported box FEU is probably about $4,500, maybe $5,000. Today, it could be over $20,000, $25,000. So it's a very skewed market today. So anything I'm going to reference is going to be before the pandemic and this supply chain problem. Export was probably half of that. So when I show savings, it'll be relative to that, because if not, our savings are even higher than that. But go ahead, next slide. Thank you. So basically, LA Long Beach, you have to keep in mind, it takes longer to go through the Panama Canal than going intermodal rail, but that offset, that differential is offset by the average dwell time and delays that are happening today, which are not going away. They are not. In fact, the study for the soy transportation is on their website. If you're interested in seeing it, let me know. If not, I think Mary or Caitlin both have copies of it. You're more than welcome to look at it. And what it really did is it looked at our speeds compared to current situation. And we actually had not only a significant savings, but we also had net landed days improvements as well. Next slide, please. I'm going to simplify this. This was CK Americas, imports coming in, exports coming in, depending on your destination, origin. There's anywhere savings from 26% to 78%. A lot more savings on the export side, but there's significant savings on the import side. And then you can see the APH, what we call advantage. That's the day's savings compared to how it's being done today. Not 100 days waiting in the West Coast. This is in a normal operational mode. Next slide, please. So a little bit representation of our savings, Memphis and St. Louis, when you look at road weight or rail weight, our boxes, if you load the boxes at the terminal, you can actually load them heavier than rail. Road weight is heavier than rail weight, and you could load the boxes at the terminal heavier than the road weight. And that gives the shipper a better advantage as well. But there is significant savings. You can see it 33% to 40%. It's actually higher than that, but these are very conservative numbers. Next slide, please. Holy mackerel, I can't read that. But so at the end of the day, let me give you an update of our milestones. We are terminal operator at LAG at Plaquemines Parish is APMT Moeller, which is one of the sister companies to Maersk Shipping, which is the largest shipping company container world. They are terminal operator. They're great partners. Not only are they going to be the terminal operator, but we're also working together collaboratively on shippers and how do we attract them to our new system. We're looking at a multi-modal startup. We're looking at second quarter of 2024 to be our operational startup date. LAG has secured, finally, there was one parcel that we've been waiting on that was done this week. This project is full speed ahead because everybody was waiting. It was contingent on that one parcel being closed. It is now closed, and it's very exciting because everybody's going to be working very hard to get this thing moving. So that land being done, they also got SP Rail partnership for the short line piece that they need for the connectivity to rail. They got a $50 million investment on that. Also, as I stated earlier, Memphis is phase 1. That'll be 4 dedicated vessels operating between Memphis and LAG. We're working on phase 2 right now. Mary, Caitlin have also been involved in that, and a lot of other people. And what we're looking at, hopefully, being our customers are going to dictate where it is, but what we're really looking for is St. Louis and probably Joliet. Kansas City may be the end of phase 2 into phase 3, depending on the timing of when they're up and operational. We have gone, APH has gone to the shipyards. We've gotten our short list of shipyards. We're going to New Orleans in the week of the 18th to meet with them again. We'll probably have shipyards decisions by May. Again, what we've gone out for is 4 vessels firm with an option for 4 more. We believe we'll be by this summer in a position to lock up the next 4 vessels for phase 2. So it's pretty exciting. Next slide, please. So what we've been doing as a group, I mean, and Missouri, it's a great story because it's this collective effort to do the right thing for Missouri. We have taken a team approach from day one, and it's outstanding. We're talking about doing, Mary has taken the lead on trying to do joint BCO meetings to try to get an interested level for all customers in and out of Missouri, make sure they're up to speed on this project. But our goal is to get them signed up for phase 2. We have some incremental cargo already signed up for phase 2, but we need to get enough to justify the next 4 vessels to 8 vessels. So that's a collaborative effort for us to work on that. We also have to secure bankable contracts. These have to be bankable so that the terminals can be built and the vessels can be built. We're not going to build it and then they will come. So everything has to be commercially viable. And then we have to align all of this with all the operational dates have to be the same date. Example, phase 1 is second quarter of 24, which means LAG has to be operating, Memphis has to be operating, and our 4 vessels have to be operating. So, and that same story will hold true for phase 2. So I open it up to whatever questions I can possibly answer. I'll be happy to.
I'll open up the task force. Any questions? Yeah, we've got Caitlin.
Hey, Sal, thank you so much. You know, Mary and I, from the beginning of this task force, have been raving about APH efforts and the progress that you've had. And I know, you know, I just have to put it out there. Sal and his team have worked extremely hard over the past years. This has been years in the making. And it is completely going to impact every importer and exporter for the future. I can tell you just, and again, yeah, your numbers, they have even more of an impact now that, bringing a container into the United States and even getting a container out is that much harder, and costs that much more. And so I just wanted to kind of put it out there for everybody. I wanted to ask Sal, one thing I approached you is, how can Missouri help? How can Missouri step up? What do you need from Missouri? I'd love for you to tell the task force and everyone listening today, you know, is it BCO involvement, which it sounds like it is? What does that look like? Is there a minimum for volume that you guys would prefer for BCOs? Missouri is home to some incredible importers and exporters, and if we can hone in on those types of volumes and run that data, to really help enhance all the marketing initiatives that you and Mary are already doing too.
A great question. Let me try to, I wrote some notes down of some things. So I'm going to give you a long-winded answer, but first on the cargo side of it, let me give you a benchmark. And it's situational because it depends on the size. There's nothing standard about this. You've got different sizes, different weights, and rateability, how often it has to be moved. Memphis right now, we're going to be with import and export will probably be around 225,000 to 250,000 TEU between import and export for dedicated vessels. The St. Louis region will probably be closer to 200,000 TEU, which I think would be an ideal benchmark for us to go after. And right now we're in the 50,000 mark and got a lot more room to go. Keep in mind that all the warehouse, all the box stores, the Walmarts, the Targets, all of those groups are absolutely interested in what we're doing here. And in fact, the comments are, what can you do to kind of start now? And I said, I wish we could, but we can't. But at the end of the day, they're going to bring that cargo is coming in, because keep in mind, the West Coast is still going to have issues. They're going to, the unions out there are really fighting the automation, and the vessels are getting bigger. And as they get bigger, it takes longer to offload them and load them. So it's just going to compound the problems out there while the market's growing. So we need this. Walmart knows that. Amazon knows that. They all know that. So they know that a new option has to be out there. So I think for St. Louis, great question. Thanks for doing that. We shoot for 200,000 TEU. Some of the things that, this project is funded by public dollars. It's mostly private dollars. So we're not asking anybody to say, hey, we can't do this and build us a new stadium and we'll play there. That's not what we're doing here. We're doing this on commercially viable terms and conditions. But there are some infrastructure dollars that you guys are already going after. I would support all of those initiatives as much as you possibly can, i.e. for the following reasons. Any of the ports in Missouri can get earmarked money that would help put skin in the game for that location. The jobs that this is going to create, both direct and indirect, it's incredible what it's going to bring to the table. But if they have skin in the game, it's also going to be predictable revenue and funds coming in for that community. So it's a way of trying to invest in its own future. So that's one way I would do that. The other would be, can you look at, permitting for road weights? Is there anything you guys can do from a certain section to get it from a certain locale to the terminal to help the shippers out? I know some of this, some of that is constrained by bridges and all of that, but I would ask you to take a look at that, because if they can get 2 tons more on board that, exponentially do that 100 times, or 100,000 TEUs, that's going to save them a lot of money. And that can help them a little bit. So I would look at that and say, how do you create a little bit of competitiveness, a competitive advantage in Missouri? Can you do that without, breaking the bank on any of those things? The other is BCOs. We need to work together, and we have been. So we need to continue to do that. I think wherever this group or other groups can get us in front of senior level people that are strategic thinkers. What's happening today in the supply chain, Caitlin, I know you know this. Everybody's fighting fires. They're just trying to figure out how to get an empty container to move it to point A to point B. We need a strategic thinker that says, hey, wait a minute. 2 years from now, there is a totally brand new option. We can change our whole system and get to significant cost advantages. How do we do that? So if we can get in front of those people, the product will sell itself, because this is a pretty strong story. The issues that are happening today validates what we're putting on the table is real. And then when you look at the cost savings that we're offering shippers, it's a true alternative, and it's a green footprint. And I don't want to downplay that. The terminal at Lag is green. Our Midwest partners will be green. Our ships are green. And then we're going to create alliances with trucking associations. We're already talking to, actually, Missouri is one of them, some of the heads of the trucking associations for some of the states. And our alliance is going to be, we're focusing on the long haul. Since they have issues getting people to drive overnight and all that, they'll focus on first mile in or last mile out. And we're going to work together in partnerships. And they may be able to upgrade their trucks in the future to have CNG or electric, whatever it may be, but it's green, and have that connectivity. So this system is the only system that is green anywhere. So and I think there's a lot of people like Walmart's and others that are getting pressure from their boards to truly get a carbon-free option. I hope I answered your question. It was long-winded.
You did. You did. Thanks, Sal. And I'll add too to the task force. I believe it's House Bill 3020 just added 50 million just specifically for port infrastructure development. So, in terms of what you were discussing about supporting legislation, that's definitely one that's current right now in Missouri. Thank you, Sal.
You bet.
Yeah, what Caitlin's referring to is the House action on one of the budget bills. So we need to see that carried forward and supported in the Senate to get it all the way home. That is, for Missouri, that's probably 5 times the annual investment that we've seen in 20 years.
Wow.
So that's a very significant move by the Missouri House, and it will be through the Port Association and everything. The targeted investment there is really fantastic. We're thrilled with that move.
Well, for clarification, we're not asking for any dollars. It would be a great opportunity for each of the locations to invest in themselves, and I think it's a wonderful system to do that. And we'll take care of the rest. We'll bring the rest of the money to the table.
Right. We just had a comment. We do have people in the room that will be asking for those dollars. So that's great. Put them to use and get that investment going. Terrific presentation. Good luck with the build out and the work that you're doing and what you've done. We do happen to think this is a very significant opportunity for the entire Midwest. So great job, and keep up the great work. So thank you very much for being here, sir.
Okay, I appreciate the opportunity, and we'll keep you all updated. Thank you kindly.
Great. Thanks.
Bye-bye now.
Thank you.
Great, thank you, Sal. Our next presenters are Mark and Richard from Port KC, who are key partners of Sal in this whole project, and as he said, are way ahead of the others in putting this project together on the Kansas City side. So Mark, all yours.
Great, thank you very much. Again, I'm Mark Coulter, Vice President General Counsel for Port KC, with my counterpart, Richard Grenville, our Vice President of Multi-Modal and Logistics. He and I have been spearheading this project. Before we get into the nuts and bolts, I'm actually kind of glad we got bumped to go after Sal, because we can really fill in John from AAR and Sal were talking about their systemic issues and the things that they have going on. What we're looking at doing, especially with this project, is really focusing on how to make Kansas City more efficient, the input and the output, the throughput really, that we have seen an uptick in over the past couple of years working with KC Smartport. We knew distribution was already exploding before this happened. In fact, when COVID hit, we had 1 or 2 projects go on pause because nobody knew what was going to happen. But then when they came back, they said, okay, we need a little bit more delay, not for any other reason than we're already having to expand our phase 1 plans. So we've seen that ancillarily and anecdotally on our real estate development, on our incentive provisions departments. But as we're already well into this, as you'll see with our time frame, we were already well into this process when the crisis hit. We knew that Kansas City had the potential to become a choke point in the future. And we were already starting to look 20 or 30 years out before the crisis hit. So when we started it, there weren't 60-minute segments on supply chain crisis and whose fault it was and where the hiccups were. Just a couple weeks ago, the governor's office reached out to us, said, is there anything we can do in the short term in Missouri to try to fix this and get things moving again, because the Biden administration had reached out to them. Next thing I know, we're on calls on how we can potentially start exporting grain a little bit more efficiently out of Missouri. That was something that came up in a meeting with two-star NOAA admiral who was talking to the Mississippi River Commission, who helps oversees the traffic on the Mississippi and the Missouri River. They were wanting to know how the East Coast ports in his case, specifically an East Coast port, could get better access to grain to ship to Europe, containerized already. And we see a value-added opportunity that we'll touch on a little bit there. But Missouri and Kansas City, specifically from our point of view, is positioned incredibly well for future growth, as long as we have a planned, coordinated effort to make sure that we don't become the next choke point like Chicago did. So start out a little bit. Current Port of Kansas City, if Richard, you'd like to cover that very quickly?
Yeah, I was hired by the Port Authority to bring commerce back to the middle Missouri River. The port closed in
Excuse me,
2007.
could we ask you to kind of come up to the microphone there? Thank you.
The port closed in 2007, and we hadn't seen any meaningful movement of freight. So the Port Authority got involved in leasing the terminal from the city, the old marine terminal. It was about 6 acres, and we started working on bringing freight back. And we were quite successful in doing that. We got an additional 3 acres from a neighbor to give us rail access. But the problem was that was as big as the port was going to be. And we had limited capacity on 9 acres. We figured we could probably put about 750 to 800,000 tons annually through there. So we started moving, looking for other access. My boss asked me to look at inland port terminals, and I came across this port of Duisburg in Germany. It's the largest inland port in the world. It's just south of Dusseldorf. In 2019, it handled over 4.4 million TEUs. And as we know, by 2040, every freight study that's been done by every Department of Transportation, whether it's state or federal, says freight is going to double expected to double in the United States. So where can we build something like this? However, Duisburg is within 100 miles, services 30 million people. So it's not, Kansas City is not quite apples and apples. But we would like to be the stepchild of Duisburg, Germany, for the state of Missouri anyway.
And a couple things about this. Number one, Duisburg obviously has the Rhine River, which it's connected to. It has rail. You can see that going in. And then, of course, the German Autobahn system is very strong. That's something that we also have in Kansas City. We have the river that is the reason Kansas City was built here. We have 5 Class 1 rail that come through the city, and we have a very connected interstate system. So we needed to take advantage of that. So Richard was tasked with going to look at. Another thing I want to point out here for the economic development side, which we can't help ourselves but to be involved in, is the ancillary development that's around that port. When you put in infrastructure, development happens around it. That is, especially if the infrastructure is located in a key area with the good access and with the good availability.
The actual port you saw there was about 400 acres, and the industrial park is about 500 acres.
So we knew we were going to be looking at something of a scale that really hadn't been seen in Kansas City, much less in Missouri. And with that meant an intense capital resource requirements. So we knew at the time there weren't any COVID funds available. ARPA was a mispronunciation of the Association of Retired Persons. So there really was, we didn't have the opportunities. Going back into my career, I started out with Senator Kit Bond, who was a fantastic champion for Missouri and wrote more appropriations, I think, than just about anybody. Those days were gone, so we knew in order to build a facility that was going to meet the next decades, the next 1 to 2 generations worth of needs, we were going to need to come up with approximately $500 million. That's a large-scale infrastructure project for MoDOT, much less for Kansas City, much less for an agency of 14 people. So we knew we were going to need to get creative and do everything we can to attract the private investment. That's kind of been the theme throughout all of the presentations today, is how do we make sure that the supply chain isn't hung up by the economy or isn't hanging up the economy, and what can government agencies, regulatory agencies do? So to underscore how we were looking at this before the supply chain crisis hit, we acquired the site after about a year and a half's worth of negotiation with AK Steel. We got a 415-acre site that is a former steel mill. So immediately off the top of the bat, you know there's going to need to be some environmental remediation. That was something we are very comfortable with handling as an agency, and knowing that we can carry that risk a whole lot easier, which will then in turn attract that private capital to invest in it. First thing we did, we engaged P3 Council. We needed somebody with experience. Kansas City and Missouri is slowly getting into that game, but we needed somebody who had had the experience under their belt. We went out for a national procurement on that. We ended up getting a very experienced Kansas City native, now permanent East Coaster, to guide us through that, basically letting us look at he made us look at ourselves and determine how are we going to present ourselves as an investment-worthy agency. Next thing we did, engage KPMG. When we went out to procurement for them, we got 12 international responses, and one team even flew their experts in from the Netherlands who worked closely with the Port of Rotterdam, because the Port of Rotterdam knew that we had an opportunity in Kansas City. They knew that as a distribution destination point for imports into the United States, but also as an agricultural origination point, we were located well. So they took the time, they spent the resources to bring their team from the Netherlands to interview. That told us that, okay, our guts are going in the right direction because we're being validated by the private market. Next, we brought them on board, and they were going to look at two things: look at us as an agency financially, but also look at the market. They're global experts in market studies, market evaluations, and they began shortly thereafter our market analysis and forecast, which is a little bit further down the time frame. But just to hit on the couple things in between there, we decided we're going to form a short line railroad, so we began the application process, starting in with a lot of the regulatory requirements that the STB has. Shortly after we began that process, we were lucky enough to receive a $10 million grant from MARAD, one of their early PIDP grants, which at the time, I think they had $220 million was their cap. They're now talking in the billions, so you're going to see a lot more money coming through that grant program. June of last year, we managed to keep this going throughout the crisis. When our office shut down, we went remote, but we stayed incredibly productive. And we're going to get to the market analysis and forecast here, because we were even surprised by some of the outcomes. We've shared it with a lot of our friends. Chris, I know you've heard this presentation half a dozen times at this point. I apologize, I still don't have any new jokes, and poor Mary has heard them all as well. But we were very excited, and we started handing out that market analysis because it really showed how much was coming in and leaving Kansas City. And it caught us all a little bit by surprise. Nobody had really aggregated those numbers in the way that we had. So just recently, we secured some private financing through a local bank. We needed a little bit of a gap bridge loan to get us through procurement. We'll begin our multi-phase RFQ, RFP process shortly in the next couple months. We're going to have an industry day in May 23rd and 24th. We're very excited about that. We have, with that process kicking off, we're looking to hopefully close it by the end of fiscal year 22. So by the end of this year, we think we'll have our partner team identified. It's very unlikely that one entity is going to be able to come in and provide all of the requirements for this. But we're hoping to have our commercial financial close Q2 '23. Construction can commence shortly thereafter, and we want to hit Sal's timeframe. When we originally started this, Richard always likes to say, we were originally looking at the site as more of a rail intermodal site. And then, Richard, you've known Sal for a number of years. I'll leave it ambiguous like that. But when he approached us, we got very excited because it was going to allow us to activate the river as well and really take advantage of the 3 modes. So we're hoping to have start of operations by 2024. There's our site. You saw it a little bit in Sal's presentation, but what this one highlights is just in this short little map, our 415 acres is there in green, but you can see 3 Class 1 main lines, the river and interstate, all within one location. More importantly, you can also see the workforce housing, at least on one side. On the other side of 435, there's more. So from the economic development standpoint, from the investment in disengaged communities, at one point, this site employed anywhere between 5,000 and 8,000 people. When the steel mill closed, those jobs left. All of the related ancillary industry left as well. And so those they weren't getting the investment, the jobs weren't coming back. So what we're excited about doing this, not because there's going to be that many employed at the port site, but if you go back to the ancillary development that goes around ports, when you have distribution requirements in Kansas City. Chris, have we come close to stabilizing yet? I mean, it is still being built it's not being built fast enough. So we see this as a great opportunity because when you zoom out, it's now in red, but our port site, that is almost the entire Kansas City metro area, and you're looking at an industrial corridor really from the Ford plant at the north all the way down to the I-49 crossing Kansas City Southern rail yard down in south, and you have an entire corridor that is primed for reinvestment. Core infrastructure is already in place. Upgrades need to be made, but there you can also see how much access we have to the entire region and the jobs that those can bring. We've got some great facilities in there from the GM plant. There's a number of other yards. But as Sal sort of alluded to, a lot of different East Coast and Gulf ports are now looking to find ways to connect to Kansas City. They've never needed to before. They've never had the opportunity to before. But with our location, with our facilities, they're starting to reach out to us. They're starting to work with Sal, with Mary, with Chris, and we're really excited about the opportunities. I am flying through this, so I apologize if I'm... the freight volume forecast, this is the one that caught us by surprise, because in 2020, we had 498,000 TEUs come in and out of Kansas City. That puts us, if you extrapolate that down into net imports, remember, right, that puts us second as a Midwest freight center, as a destination of TEUs, that we have 225,000 TEUs come to Kansas City and get broken up. Obviously, we're number 2 behind Chicago. They're sort of their own monster with their own issues. But number 3 was Columbus, Ohio. St. Louis was 4th after that. Louisville, Cincinnati, Indianapolis, Detroit even. They're not the destination that we are because we're a much greater distribution center. So let's take advantage of that, and that's kind of where we're headed with this. Shifting gateways. Sal, we stole a map from Sal. He stole one of our things, so this works out perfectly. But what it shows is that pre-Panama Canal expansion, that line shifts from roughly the western edge of the Appalachian Mountains right down through Kansas City. So all of a sudden, it's not... Sal had a different map which showed the Midwest battleground, but I like this one to show just how primely situated we are because it's just as efficient for both coasts now, for the Gulf Coast. It really highlights the advantage that we already knew about and we were already seeing, but as everybody, John with the rail said, I wrote it down a little differently than he said it, but the whole just-in-time delivery model is being reevaluated. And he said, we don't know what it looks like right now. Well, people are figuring it out. And if we can play our role and do our statutory responsibility as a port authority, we can help make Kansas City more efficient with the input and output. I'm going to go back two more. I jumped ahead a little bit. But with this, if you look at how, yes, freight is supposed to double by 2040, but using a very conservative 1.3 annual rate of growth, that puts us at 1.3 million TEUs input and output in Kansas City by 2040 and almost 2 million by 2060. When I was younger, I would think 40 years is a long time. I'm now older and I can remember 40 years ago, so I realize just how short of a time that is. And so as our role in as the Port of Kansas City, we're trying to look out that 40, 50 years. And that's really what we're structuring this project to be, a generational investment in infrastructure to make sure Kansas City is primed for growth and can handle this. Oh, by the way, most importantly, that growth is not taking from other markets. It is not taking from other modes of transportation. That is simple, natural growth. Go forward. Catoosa case study. This is what I like to show this one. We kind of highlighted it with Duisburg, but this is a great one. The Port of Tulsa now started in, the dock opened up in 1971. I went back and double checked. 1971, they opened with a dock and a dream. And you can see it there. That is the Port of Catoosa as of last year right now. They started with 2,500 acres, and the only requirement to develop on that acre was you be a port customer. They turned that one little dock into fully developed 2,500 acres and they just closed on another 2,500 acres for their future growth. So as you can see, when you make these targeted investments in the right ways and put together the right team to attract that business, you can have tremendous success, because a lot of those businesses used to ship out of the Port of Kansas City when it was opened. And over the years, as Kansas City stopped making the investments, Catoosa kept making them. And so it became more viable for them. On a even more challenging waterway than the Missouri River, because the Arkansas has to be dredged constantly. The Missouri is self-scouring. These are some of the things, and they're in your packet, so I'm not going to go through all of them, but some of the things that we were looking at, the benefits, both logistically, socially, economically. These are some of the opportunities and tools that we have at our disposal to ensure that the investments made into this site are going to, number one, pay off, make money for our partner operators, make money for our private side, while still upholding the requirements of the public good and the public interest, which is what we're representing in the P3 structure.
Yeah, that third bullet, agricultural grains, DDGs, oilseed transfer, that's going on right now in Kansas City. But it's limited with the number of facilities. We stand a chance to do a really good job for the agricultural community on this terminal. And as Sal alluded to, you're going to be able to put more weight into that container because it's not going to have to go over the road. So we really think that the agricultural community will be really behind this. And again, like I say, it's already going on here, so it's nothing new. And more people want to be able to sell higher quality agricultural goods and be able to have that chain of security.
And that one really highlights the efficiency opportunity that we have in Kansas City to play our role in making the goods come. If we can be more efficient on our end, it'll by definition make things more efficient on the coasts and allow them to turn their ships around faster, get those chassis moved, get the containers in and out more efficiently if we can start doing some of the work in Kansas City. It's not a quick fix, but it is a long-term sustainable fix, because one of the things I think we all realized on the past couple of years, the supply chain was not as resilient as we thought it might be. A couple really bad things happening can disrupt it, and as from John's slide with the inventory shortages, it's taking a long time to fix it. So we need to know this is going to happen again. Something is going to come up. So what we want to do is just make sure that we're playing our role. I-435 connection, speaking of dollars. this is something we've been working with, we've been talking to MoDOT for a little while. We need direct access to 435. And after speaking with them, we had a couple preliminary designs lined up. If I can summarize the district MoDOT staff, it was, oh God, please no, don't try to do this. So we said, okay, that's great. Thank you. That's some good feedback. We took it back and we designed something that met the needs of MoDOT, allowed us to tap into an underutilized industrial on-ramp onto 435. But what it really does is it reinvigorates that entire corridor. It'll not only provide a good, strong, hard entrance and exit to our facility, which is going to need to be a secured site. It will also allow Bayer to have greater input and output through their facility, which is right next door. We just recently learned they import over 30,000 containers of liquid every year. And they have to get them all in and out through one little thing. So what we're doing, and spoiler, Director McKenna, this is what we're kind of eyeing some of those ARPA funds for, is trying to make sure that we have the ability to get in and out of our port and grow that entire corridor. There's another large manufacturing facility which would directly benefit from this Custom Truck One Source, one of the fastest growing companies in the area. They are the largest specialized truck manufacturer in the United States, and right now they're using a rather difficult on-ramp, off-ramp next to their facility. If we put this in, we'll be in a good position to assist them, to assist our neighbors and our future customers. So there's an artist's impression. Kansas City likes its pictures. We're a wonderful design town. So we like to highlight what it can be. And if you look very closely, there's a couple of Shuttle Vessels pulling up. But it highlights just how much storage, what sort of an intermodal facility this could be. Those buildings are large. The rail is probably going to be on the other side of the facility. But ideally, it's to show you the vision and how we can position ourselves as one small part, one small link in the larger supply chain to improve efficiencies, work with the BCOs, work with the rail, work with the trucking industry to make sure that we're providing a facility that anybody can use to help their customers, to grow their customer base and really be that public infrastructure that Kansas City is kind of lacking right now. So I think that's the fastest we've ever done it. I apologize.
Light speed.
So happy to answer any. Mr. Spencer, you brought up earlier the Savannah. Just today in the Kansas City Business Journal, they announced the Georgia Ports Authority authorized more than $538 million in expansion projects just today, just this year. I think last year they put in a $220 million rail dock expansion. And Director McKenna, to your point, I've been around long, and I started with the Port Authority 11 years ago. We were getting $0. It had been 20 years since we had gotten anything. I think that first year we got $3 million, slowly ramped up to $10 million. But this shows just the sort of disparity that's going on between states that are and their port authorities. So I just kind of always like to highlight that, and I'm glad you brought it up. And Mr. Spencer, also, we have a little bit more optimistic view of the East Coast port opportunities than Mr. May, I believe, did. But again, to reiterate what he said and what I said earlier, things are changing. We don't exactly know what it's going to look like, but we need to start thinking 20, 30 years in the future rather than quick fixes now. We need to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time and do both.
Great presentation. Do we have any questions from panel members? You know, I'd comment as well. We received an updated capital improvement list from the Port Association. It's over $440 million. You know, and kudos to you and to the ports in Missouri for really focusing on this and trying to bring that to the attention of policymakers, because, you know, $3, $4, $10 million is not going to compare to $500 million at a single port, right?
Yeah.
And that is one of the issues here, but it's also one of the opportunities. And with the economy the way it is, with the resources that are available in Missouri right now, it's a perfect time to get some of these investments rolling.
And to speak to, I'm trying to use everybody's last name, to speak to Ms. Murphy's point on the bill that was made. The 50 million, I think, was in addition to 148, which were also identified, if I read the language right. That is fantastic. We're very excited about it. The subsequent language requiring a one-to-one dollar match is a little challenging for us as small entities, so that's something we'll be working on and would appreciate any support as we work on that. One-to-one is that's a tough challenge. I think Director McKenna knows that, but yeah, thank you again for bringing that out. That was a highlight. That was an important part of news this week.
Yeah, and I've talked to the Missouri Highway and Transportation Commission just this week, and we've talked about the future appropriations requests, particularly this next, we're just getting through this one right now, but planning for next year. I want to be a lot more aggressive in terms of representing, now that we've got this list of needs, in terms of representing what the industry need is, and then have it whittled backwards instead of trying to build it. Go aggressive and then see just how much we can secure to get these investments going. We also need to take a hard look at the ability to fund multi-year projects in a more beneficial way than a single state fiscal year for those funds.
Yeah.
It is very challenging for the whole port community, for any type of transportation or investment, any major investment. Having single fiscal years to do it, the planning phase, and what is hard to communicate is that, you want to start with the scale you need and do the long-range planning associated with it, but you have to have the commitment of the construction funds before you're going to commit.
Please try again.
Well, something went wrong, but we really have to have that public discussion about that process. I would love to see a capital program that funds multi-year projects.
Yeah, that would be fantastic from our point of view, especially with looking at it from a P3 perspective. We need more flexibility to get to attract the private dollars. And the planning stage, we're waiting for our operators to make the final plans. We don't want to build it and then say, hey, come use this facility, and then they ask, as Richard always has pointed out, why did you build it that way? Well, we'd rather give them that flexibility, but that's hard with a single year. So
it is fantastic, great timing with and for the advanced planning to be really looking out into the future and looking at what the possibilities are, linking up with the other ports, with the other industry, working with Sal, doing all of these things. It's taken a lot of effort. You guys have done a really great job, so I appreciate being here.
And thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, let's see. Next up, do we have, and first I'll start by saying we're running a little beyond time, so I want to thank Mr. Derek James from Amtrak for hanging with us and being patient. We've had some great presentations, and we really look forward to the Amtrak presentation, kind of sharing scarce resources, which is what it really has been the name of the game in a lot of the discussions we've had so far. So I'll turn it over to Mr. James, and again, thank you very much for your patience and for being with us today.
No, thanks for inviting me to come and speak with you guys today. It's actually very informative. Partly I'm in the transportation industry and have been for more than 20 years because it's a really dynamic sector of the economy. We work on the passenger side and appreciate the opportunity to sort of share what's been going on this side of the mode, if you will, and how we think the investments that we would like to make in partnership with the federal government and with the state, we think can maximize the ability to bolster the supply chain, to contribute to the economic vitality of Missouri. So again, my name is Derek James. I'm with Amtrak, the National Railroad Passenger Corporation. For many people don't realize that we are a creation of the federal government. President Nixon signed us into being in the fall of 1970. And in 1971, we took over the operation of most of the nation's interstate and intercity passenger trains. the private sector freight railroad network, which is obviously still a critical component of our transportation system, was bowing out of the passenger train industry. Competitive pressures from new highways, from the aviation industry, did not make the service economic any longer to be supported by the private sector. Yet Congress felt that it was important for the U.S. to continue to have a passenger train system, and has provided the support for that system since then. Why don't we go ahead to the next slide? Thanks much. Here, and I wanted to touch on, we are in a growth mode right now in passenger rail. Over the past 15 years or so, pre-pandemic, we have gone from about 21 million annual customers to 32 million customers on our 21,000 mile route system. We've really seen an uptake among the new generation in terms of experiencing the convenience of passenger rail. Many of these folks are making decisions based upon their climate footprint. And as a result, we think of many of the improvements that we have been making in terms of technology, in terms of fleet, in terms of the station environment. The map that I have on display here is really a vision for where we think passenger rail can go in the United States. Many folks, when they think of Amtrak, they think of the long distance overnight transcontinental passenger trains that connect the coast with the Midwest. And yeah, that certainly plays a role, especially for many of the rural communities that we serve. But the real sweet spot for passenger rail is on those corridors connecting major cities with intermediate cities of many sizes of about 100 to 400 miles apart. That's really the sweet spot for passenger rail. That's where, if we have the resources, we can provide high quality, frequent service that is what we call trip time competitive. It's just as fast when we can be just as fast as driving. We really do have lots of uptake in our services because people are able to relax. They're able to get some work done with onboard Wi-Fi. And those are the sorts of distances that may just be a bit too short for our aviation system and maybe not as economic for flying. So that's really where we want to see growth in the U.S. And you can see where we have highlighted corridors that we don't serve today that we would like to serve. Those are the blue lines connecting major cities that do not have high quality frequent service. We presented this vision to Congress last year as they were debating the infrastructure bill. We felt this was an opportunity to see really a game-changing investment in passenger rail, and the Congress did deliver, and the president did sign that legislation into being in November. It provides for $66 billion in investments in the rail infrastructure of the nation, and we are ready to work with the states. These funds will be distributed as competitive grants to states that are interested, and we are going out and soliciting states and informing them of the availability of these dollars and saying, hey, partner with us to actually expand and increase the passenger rail service between your major cities. We have for many years had a partnership with the state of Missouri to provide intercity passenger rail service between St. Louis and Kansas City. And we would like to see that service grow and improve. We think the marketplace is there with the congestion that you see on Interstate 70, and as well as a lot of enthusiasm and support for the service with the intermediate cities. Next slide, please. Here is a blow up of the network that we would like to see in the Midwest. As you can see there, there is the St. Louis, Kansas City corridor. We do have a couple of other routes of our transcontinental network that pass through the state of Missouri. They're running from the northeast corner of the state over to Kansas City. We are in discussions with several communities that would like to have train service where we do not stop. Carrollton is one, Marceline is another. Then we have our corridor from Chicago to St. Louis, which is a high frequency corridor that we operate in conjunction with the state of Illinois, and the state and Amtrak and the federal government have been in the process of increasing the speeds on that corridor so we can get trip times between St. Louis and Chicago down to less than 4 hours and train speeds of 110 miles per hour. One of those trains does continue south of St. Louis to the southern part of the state and on to Dallas, Texas. We recently added a station stop at Arcadia Valley. We have always stopped at Poplar Bluff, and we know that DeSoto, Missouri is interested, and we are starting to do the analysis to see if it makes sense for us to add a stop at that community. Next slide, please. We know that with your group here that what's really important is making sure that the supply chain is fluid and able to move the products and of the goods produced by Missouri manufacturers and that are needed by Missouri consumers. Our network operates, it's a shared use network. Our 21,000 route network operates on the freight railroad network of the United States. The America's Freight Railroads, and in your state, BNSF and Union Pacific are two of our largest railroads in hosting Amtrak trains. They do a pretty good job of hosting those trains. We know it's important for them to move their freight because that's what the shareholders rely on. But we also understand that human beings are a priority, and we want them to have the resources that they need to be able to expeditiously move our passenger trains. I have a couple examples that I want to go through of corridors around the country where we have had a great partnership with the freight railroads, the states, the federal government to actually invest in corridors to make sure that the freight moves as well as the passenger trains. One of our signature corridors is what we call the Hiawatha service between Chicago and Milwaukee. It's an 86-mile route with almost 1 million trips pre-pandemic. Very, very popular among the business community in both Milwaukee and Chicago. We have many firms like SC Johnson and Miller Coors that have facilities in both cities. So there's a lot of travel back and forth on those 14 trains a day that we operate between Milwaukee and Chicago. That is operated over 2 railroads. Around the Chicago area, we operate on Metro, the commuter railroad, and then north of the suburbs there, we operate on the Canadian Pacific Railroad. This route is part of Canadian Pacific's main transcontinental route from the Chicago hub over to the port of Vancouver. That route is dispatched by Canadian Pacific, and the on-time performance in the last few quarters has been 95%. So they dispatch 14 Amtrak trains, about 50 commuter trains, and their freight trains as well. And the passenger trains are consistently on time. And that's because we've made investments in that route to help CP do both their freight and the passenger trains. Next slide, please. Those are just a bit of the financial results of the route prior to the pandemic as we made more and more improvements. The operating subsidy was declining and was on track to be 0 in fiscal year 20. Of course, the pandemic upset a lot of that. We are now seeing some return to work. We are in discussions with a lot of the employers who move people along that corridor. They are developing their return to work protocols based upon our return to passenger service. As we add more and more trains, they're sending more people back to work. So we expect this route to continue to be a success in the Midwest. Next slide, please. Yeah, these are the partners that we work with on that corridor to dispatch all of those trains at that high percentage of on time. Next slide, please. These are some of the investments that we have made over the years in the physical network to provide for high quality freight and passenger train services. We'll highlight the third item in 2012 at a place called Truesdale and Pleasant Prairie. $11 million of federal grants were received to actually put in additional crossovers to increase the level of flexibility so that CP could easily dispatch and move passenger trains around slower freight trains. Then the next item, 2014, the Wadsworth Bridge was replaced, again, using a combination of federal funding and funding from the railroad since there was mutual benefit there. In 2019, the state of Wisconsin received a federal grant of $5 million to match with Wisconsin funds. One of the very, very popular stations on the route is at the Milwaukee Airport. That's the station in the lower right-hand corner. Right now it has one platform on one side of the double track main line. So anytime a southbound passenger train needs to stop at Milwaukee, and that's 7 of the daily trains, that passenger train has to switch over to the northbound main to stop at the Milwaukee Airport Station. And when it leaves, it has to switch back over to the southbound main. That creates a bottleneck for CP's operation because they therefore then have to stop any of their northbound trains to wait for the Amtrak train to stop using the southbound platform. The federal grant, along with Wisconsin funds, are allowing construction, and we will be letting that construction project this summer for a second platform on the other side. There'll be an up and over, a grade separated walkway with elevators and stairs to get passengers over to the eastern side of the main line. So that means that southbound trains will not have to block the northbound main when they stop, and that's going to dramatically increase the fluidity and the ability of CP to maintain on-time performance for all of the trains. In 2020, we were very happy to receive a successful federal award of $26.5 million to match with CP funds, Amtrak funds, and state funds to do a bypass around the downtown Milwaukee Airport Station so that all freight trains can use a different route. And we can see an image of that if we go to the next slide. So the orange line that comes up from the south and then turns to the left, that's what we call the Muskego Yard bypass. The Milwaukee Intermodal Station, which is also on the CP Railroad, is up near the junction of I-794, 94, and 43 there with the arrow. This bypass will add a double track section through the yard so that CP can reroute all of its freight trains and not have to deal with the passenger train congestion at the yard. So again, another example of a partnership that it benefits both the passenger train and the freight operator. Next slide, please. Elsewhere in the Midwest, we are about to add additional train service between Chicago, Milwaukee, La Crosse, and the Twin Cities. Again, this is a partnership with Canadian Pacific Railroad. We work with them to determine what sort of capacity improvements would be needed on their railroad to accommodate new train service on this 400-mile route connecting two really major American cities. CP came back to us and said that they could use $53 million in capacity enhancements, primarily work at the bridge crossing the Mississippi River at La Crosse, additional passing sidings at La Crosse and at Winona and at Minnesota City. We worked with the legislatures in both Wisconsin and Minnesota to secure matching dollars. The federal government is providing $32 million, and Amtrak is investing $5 million, and we are in the final design to start to begin construction work to put in these enhancements so that we can, within a year or two, begin additional passenger train service, doubling the frequency between these major American cities in Illinois, Wisconsin, and Minnesota. Next slide, please. That's just, again, laying out the sort of division of the funds that have come in, the partnership that's really there between multiple entities. Next slide, please. So Missouri really set the stage for some of this, even prior to the infrastructure bill and some of the federal funds that have started to flow for passenger rail development over the last 10 years, that we worked with the previous administration and in the state of Missouri and the DOT to identify capacity improvements that are needed on the primary rail route that we serve in Missouri. That rail route is dispatched and owned by our partner, the Union Pacific Railroad. They identified that between St. Louis and Jefferson City, which is a really busy segment of the corridor for freight traffic, there was a choke point at the bridge over the Osage River, where the double track main line slimmed down to just one track to go over the river. The railroad and the state and Amtrak were successful in securing a federal grant to construct a new double track bridge over the Osage River, again, opening up fluidity and expanding capacity on that corridor. Also, some siding extensions were identified. Successfully put in place was a new siding at California at a cost of $8.1 million, paid for with federal and state funds. We saw a dramatic improvement in the on-time performance of the Amtrak trains on this corridor when these infrastructure investments were put in place, and it reflected in the ridership as well, which grew to almost 200,000. So really been a successful partnership. Next slide, please. So again, just wanted to demonstrate that passenger rail and freight rail can work together. We fully expect and anticipate that the dollars that are being provided for rail over the next 5 years as part of the infrastructure bill, a lot of those funds will go towards capacity investments on the nation's freight railroad system so that the passenger trains can move expeditiously, but so can the freight as well. And I guess with that, I'd like to leave it open to any questions that folks may have about the Amtrak program, and especially in the state of Missouri.
Great. Any questions from task force?
Eric, thank you for your presentation. You know, you said something that I found very interesting. You're working with employers to think about the workforce as it comes back and how you help mobilize that workforce. Could you tell us a little bit more about what that's looking like? Because I think that's something that, especially in Missouri, you know, we have the River Runner, which I know is sometimes hard to support financially, but that is about mobilizing workforce. If we can connect people in central Missouri to both sides of the state, I think that that's absolutely a challenge we have.
Especially, you know, of course, there are a lot of questions about the return to work and what that's going to look like for our nation's transit systems. But employers are demonstrating that they are going to be flexible in terms of when employees can come to work. So that's going to give folks the flexibility to sort of set up their lives more akin to what they want. We know that a lot of folks may be looking for the quality of life that may exist in our smaller communities. And so having quality rail service to some of these communities allows folks to maybe not have to live in the larger city, but live in a smaller place and be able to get to the city a couple of times a week to tend to business. I know my company is calling them collaboration days. So we think it's a real advantage. It's also going to change, I think, the peak nature of travel, that it's not going to be so much concentrated at the rush hour. So people are going to have more flexibility. And I think that's going to lend itself well to the type of service that we'd like to provide with frequencies throughout the day. I will just add that the House did just act this afternoon and did bolster the amount of funds going to the Amtrak program. So we're pretty happy and hopefully that will get an affirmation on the Senate side as well.
Yeah, we're hoping for that as well. We were thrilled with Amtrak's support as we worked with the legislature there and with the communities. I think it was really the communities along the River Runner that carried that message so effectively. Todd has a question here. Todd?
I may have missed this, but what is the annual ridership from Kansas City to St. Louis and vice versa?
Pre-pandemic, it's been just shy of 200,000 people. We are actually about to implement a service improvement that we think will increase that by several thousands of people. We're going to take one of the existing trains between St. Louis and Kansas City and combine it with one of the Chicago-St. Louis trains so that there will be through service, so that all the destinations in Missouri will have through service to all the destinations in Illinois. We know that when folks have to change trains, which right now you have to change trains in St. Louis, that puts a damper on the potential for ridership. If people can ride through, we've estimated that will be an additional $1 million impact in terms of improvement in revenue once we implement that change. And we just got approval from Union Pacific Railroad to do that. So thank you to them for working with us.
Yeah, that's the communities, particularly the ones that service, you know, the bike riders that go along our Katy Trail and others, and with the development of Rock Island. We see that as a really significant potential gain as people come through and from the Chicago area to come down and experience some really great Missouri outdoor times, as well as the commuting aspect. And we pointed out in some of the testimony that, you know, frankly, the River Runner is a critical link for disabled folks in Missouri to access the state capitol. It's actually the only the only additional mode other than on the highways to get to the state capitol. It's really a vital link and crucial that we continue to support that and to build on it. And hopefully, with the discussions that we've had, I know there are other parts of the state that would like to see passenger rail service extended. I know that's a big ask in Missouri for that capital infusion, but you know, the Springfield area, you look up into St. Joe, into Hannibal, some of these places are really have the potential, I think, for those connections that could be really valuable. So I do really appreciate your partnership and your patience working with us through the policy process in Missouri. It's a challenge sometimes, but I think the the fact that the public really came out and expressed their views and their support was a big part of it, and we really do benefit from that partnership with Amtrak, and we appreciate you being with us today. Any further questions for Mr. James? No. Well, again, my apologies to keep you a little bit later than you anticipated, than we anticipated, but we do appreciate your presentation and your partnership.
Well, best of luck in the rest of your conference today. I do have another meeting I have to jump onto, but I've been glad to be a part of the education process for the legislators and for the citizenry. And I think the potential that we have with the improvements that are coming are going to make some of those discussions about expansion a little bit easier.
That's right. That's right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful day. Okay. You know, the last couple of meetings, the presentations have just been phenomenal. I think we've got so much information to sift through as a task force. So this is great. The next meeting, I just want to make sure everybody's aware of the next meeting's in St. Joseph on April 21st. So if you could check your calendars and make sure that works for you. And I wanted to open it up for any comments any task force members may have before we close it out, and then certainly if we can check if there are any public comments from anybody. No. Looking mostly at staff. So no, it's good that we have the online options that are developed, so we can still get the reach out to the public. Any comments from task force members? No. Okay, you've got 2 minutes to get to the ball game. So thank you all for your attendance and for your participation, and we'll see you on April 21st.